I couldn't run a growing operation without the use of synthetic fertilizers and chemical pesticides. In the mid-1990s, I sort of reevaluated where I was and began to get concerned about the use of the synthetics and particularly pesticides. Began to explore organic strategies and went out beyond my commercial greenhouse operation into turf, landscapes, and other growing agricultural environments, taking organic strategies and teaching organic strategies. So my specialty in this presentation is going to be soil chemistry and how what we do to the horizon or how we manage it ultimately affects the A horizon. We're going to define all of that stuff and exactly what it is. And that is going to be the foundation and the fundamental way that you are going to grow your crops, where you're going to manage for quality, where you're going to monitor. And we're going to talk a little bit about soil testing and why that's important and why, if you are not soil testing, you're just shooting from the hip.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, 1 second, Chip. Sorry, sir. Yes, Leighton, we can hear you.
All right, cool. I'm here, but for whatever reason, my camera is not working, although it says it's on. So I'm going to just pull up the presentation and just follow along when Chip indicates. Sorry about the technical issues again. All
right, so we'll walk through it. So please continue, Chip, and then if you guys kind of want to piggyback like we did before.
Sure,
that was fantastic, the flow that you gentlemen had.
So what we'll do is give me a couple seconds, and I'm going to ask Leighton to introduce himself and to set the stage, and then I'll come back and start us off with some definitions as a sounding board or a starting point. The comment that I was just going to make is that we were talking about influencing the O to benefit the A, and we're going to talk about in container production or bed production, a modified O horizon. But in any of these, whether we're growing in the OA outside in field production, or whether we're doing either interior or exterior grows in containers or beds, testing and monitoring of that soil environment is critically important. And we're going to talk about how we test, why we test, and what we are actually testing for. But make no mistake that whatever time and effort and expense you put into testing will dramatically increase productivity and quality and gains on the other end. Leighton, you ready to give a little bit of an introduction of yourself?
Sure. I got involved in large-scale agricultural and engineered soils back in about 2008. I spent some time down at Rodale, about 18 months, studying under Dr. Lane to figure out what it was that I had in a fish waste product and how the biology functions in the soil. And so from there, I went on to doing national installations across the country. Then I got into landscape construction for watershed and sensitive areas where they could not use synthetics, which led me to meet Chip and off to a continued work throughout the country in getting people to a biological system and away from synthetic systems.
Perfect. So that and like Leighton, both of us work nationally, on a variety of different projects and ranges and scopes. And it all has to do with managing land or cropland or some type of land system biologically, organically, and merging that with typical soil science. So in other words, we're not denying soil science. We have a foundation in soil science. We're incorporating and including the microbial part of it as critically important and the starting point. And we are presenting this all being done in a non-chemical framework without synthetics. So our learning objectives, the learning objectives that we'd like for you to take away from this session is understanding the limitations of super soil. That's in parentheses there because super soil is something that is created as an all-in-one mix that simply, fill the container and go. There are limitations, and Leighton's going to elaborate on that. We're going to learn the function of the E, A, and O horizons. We're going to look at the importance and the benefits of compost, and we will drive home the point that all compost is not created equal, and compost should be tested for both chemistry and biological life. We're going to look at the role of soil chemistry in some of the individual plant processes within the cannabis plant. We're going to talk about soil and compost testing, and then we're going to address nutrients in the soil and how we can make use of what is naturally there. And then interspersed in Leighton's will be recommendations on applied materials, or how we can introduce something to make a positive benefit. Preliminary definitions that set the table for us. Soil horizons. The O horizon is mostly organic matter, such as decomposing leaves and other organic materials. In some soils, it can be thin, and in other soils, it can be thicker. There are field soils where it may not be present at all. So as you can see in this slide, it's right at the top. It's from 0 to 2 inches at the top. So that basically, undecomposed organic materials. The A horizon, mostly minerals from parent rock material with organic matter incorporated. Good 5% organic matter on average across the United States for a field soil. This is a good material for plants and microbes. We soil test, we grow, and we manage in the A horizon. Container soil, a generally homogeneous mixture created by recipe. There may be stratified layers, or it may be blended so that it provides one uniform root zone mix. This is what we call a modified O horizon, high in organic matter. It can be done for indoor grow, greenhouse, or outdoor beds. Field soil. The soil is naturally found in different growing regions of the country. It may have different characteristics from soils in other regions of the country. We generally do not try to change this soil in any one region to match the soil of another region if that soil is thought to be more desirable. But rather, we focus on improving soil health and the organic matter fraction of any individual soil to better support the microbial community and the plant. So we are growing in the A horizon, and it is not our goal in any project in any part of the country to try to change substantially the existing A horizon to become something else. Leighton, let's shift back to you now for a bit for the modified O horizon in container production.
Yes, sir. So what's probably the most popular thing at this point in time is super soils. So when we say super soil, it is a soilless medium that has been modified with organic inputs. A lot of these inputs are not plant available. They are biologically available. So it's very important that you use a biological inoculant to release those nutrients and make them available for the plant. So in its typical super soil, you have 1/3 compost, 1/3 peat, coir, or pit moss, and 1/3 aeration. Now, this does provide a great system for rapid plant growth. Because of the aeration, it allows for gas exchange, and it is great for holding liquids. So it's been very popular over the years, but the only problem with it is that it will not allow for advanced biology to continue to thrive and grow out. So the next slide. Functions of a moderated O horizon. So a moderated O horizon is going to supply support for the plant, which is important. Can't have the plant falling over. It also allows for really good gas exchange. Again, because of that aeration, we're allowed to get oxygen down into the root zone to feed the biology. Biology consumes the oxygen and then releases it back to the plant in a form called CO2. Again, this allows for a rapid root growth. Again, it holds liquid, as in, traditionally it would be bottled nutrients. But again, we're trying to move away from that into a living soil system. And it also is ideal for green mulch. And now green mulch is living plants that are used around your cash crop. And the best part about what they do is they create a microclimate right at the soil, which prevents evaporation. Next slide. Nutritional value of substrates. So this is really important to understand. Coir is high in potassium. The nice part about it is it will not throw your ratio, which is calcium, magnesium to potassium, which is a critical test measurement to determine the fertility of your soil. So the good news is this will not throw your potassium out of whack because it's not plant available. It's not in the soil. It's tied up. The only way it can be released is through bacteria mining it, and then those bacteria being consumed by a protozoa and then releasing that in the root zone called the rhizosphere for plant nutrient uptake. Pit moss is one of the things I've been talking a lot about over the last few years. It's ideal because it is a renewable source. It's recycled plant matter. Lignin, of course, is the main ingredient. It holds nutrients, it holds water, and pit moss adds their nutritional value to it based on what you're looking to get. Peat moss has no nutritional value whatsoever. Its strength is that it does hold liquids, does hold moisture. It does slightly increase the CEC, which is important. But again, we need to get away from peat because it is a environmental problem. You're draining very sensitive, fragile environments, and I think there's only 3% of the world is covered with peat moss. Now, rice hulls is a nice aeration. It does hold some silica, which is nice, but unfortunately, it can be loaded with arsenic, and again, it should be tested. Your cannabis plants are accumulators, as you know, and so it's not good to have arsenic building up in those plants. Lava rock is a nice aeration. The only problem is that, yes, it holds minerals, but it's basically biologically locked up. Because it is glazed over, it's very difficult for those bacteria to set up their biofilms and start to mine that material. So there's other alternatives that, like coir, is a great both aeration as well as substrate. Next slide, please. So increasing organic nutrients. A lot of things you can use. Water, for instance, has a lot of minerals tied up in it. If it is a spring water, if it's an RO water, it will have 0 minerals. So keep that in mind. Yeah, you can actually take fruits and juice them. You can take plants and juice them, and they are a very quick way to get increased nutrients to your plant. There's fermenting. There's a lot of work that's been done online, taking different types of plants and fermenting them to release the nutrients, and then, of course, water them in is a quick way to also increase nutritional value in these types of soils. There's a lot of natural farming preps, or Korean natural farming, depending on how you call it. Natural farming is world known. Korean natural farming is only called that here in America. Another nice way to get nutrients to your plant is through amino acid digests. These are relatively new to the industry, but they're becoming more and more popular because when you foliar feed them, your plant is not using a tremendous amount of energy uptaking those nutrients. So again, these can be fed foliar. All of the above nutrients can be applied foliarly to the plant, which reduces plant energy consumption. And it also can be used to drench the soil, which in turn feeds the biology and in turn feeds the plant. Next slide, please. And that's back to you, Chip.
Yeah. So we'll talk a little bit about mineral nutrients. So mineral nutrients have their origins in parent rock material. So when we understand that sand, silt, and clay are particle size definitions, and it simply is a way of classifying soil minerals by the size of the particle. Those minerals contain nutrients. not all minerals are nutrients, but this is where the mineral nutrient fraction of the soil exists. So we have what we call top tier macronutrients: nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, the three that people know most about. And typically what agriculture, what land management, what cannabis production focuses on is NPK. What the topic today is going to suggest to you is that maybe we go beyond NPK and really develop our monitoring, testing, and management programs to include everything else. We have second tier macronutrients: calcium, magnesium, and sulfur. So collectively, these six are referred to as macronutrients. They are determined as such because concentrations of these six are what appear in the largest amounts when we do tissue analysis. We have micronutrients. They're just as important as macronutrients, but they're used and are available in the soil generally in very small amounts. Manganese, boron, iron, molybdenum, zinc, oxygen, and copper. Nitrogen. Nitrogen is required for vegetative growth in the cannabis plant, as we all know, but it also forms part of the chlorophyll molecule. The chlorophyll molecule is where food for the plant is, or let's say it's at the heart of how food is actually produced for the plant. I should state right here that nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium are not plant food. There is no food for the plant in any of the macro or micronutrients. They really want to be thought of more as raw materials or catalysts that aid in physiological functions within the plant. So we all have heard of the term photosynthesis. Photosynthesis is the concept that we have energy from the sun. We have green leaves. The green in the leaf of the plant is chlorophyll. As we add nitrogen, or as nitrogen is made available, chlorophyll density is increasing, meaning it's getting more concentrated. The molecule that forms chlorophyll is responsive to nitrogen, and N makes up part of that molecule. The microscopic openings on the underside of the cannabis leaves, called stomata or stomates, open and close. And in the presence of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, energy from the sun, moisture, the stomata open, carbon dioxide goes internally in the leaf of the cannabis plant. Chemical reaction happens with chlorophyll, and amino acid, protein, carbohydrate are produced. That is plant food. 40% of the carbohydrates that are produced in this process of photosynthesis find their way down to become root exudates, where they leave the root system of the plant and provide carbon energy for the microbial community that chooses to colonize that root. This is also the path where we are sequestering carbon, where we are taking carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and sequestering it as carbon energy in the soil in the form of carbohydrate to drive the biomass. So nitrogen goes way beyond just providing vegetative growth. Phosphorus plays an important role in energy transfer, respiration, the opposite of photosynthesis. If you think of photosynthesis as producing the energy for the plant, the respiration is the process that takes that energy and puts it into active growth. Transforms sugars and starches, helps move nutrients around, transfers genetic characteristics to the next generation. Potassium, also needed for photosynthesis. It opens and closes the stomata, regulates carbon dioxide uptake, activates enzymes for ATP production, cellular respiration. Leighton's going to talk to you about the energy currency of the plant. If we get the macro and micronutrients correctly, the plant does not have to do as much work to get that energy transferred into active growth. Potassium is also regarded to be very strongly linked to stress resistance, particularly disease resistance, creating thick cell walls that have the ability to stand up to several different pathogens without getting into or sort of a natural protection of the plant. Calcium is involved in plant growth and nutrition, cell wall deposition, reduces soil salinity, enhances water penetration, directly involved in nutrient exchange from the cation exchange sites. So if we have nutrients that are stored on the electrically charged sites in the soil, known as cation sites, that reach out and attract positive charged cations. If we had potassium on one of these electrical sites and the plant needed potassium, it would put out calcium as an exudate. Calcium would become attracted to that exchange site, release the potassium, and the potassium is now in soil solution and plant available. So calcium is very important in that aspect of mining those exchange sites for nutrients. Magnesium, central to the chlorophyll molecule, essential for photosynthesis. Sulfur helps important enzymes, assists in protein synthesis. Now into the micronutrients. Manganese contributes to photosynthesis, respiration, and nitrogen assimilation. Involved in germination, cell wall elongation, and resistant to root disease. Manganese is central to efficient nitrogen uptake by the root of the plant. Boron helps build cell walls, essential for cell division, important in pollination and seed development. Iron, key to the important metabolic processes, DNA synthesis, chlorophyll synthesis, maintains chloroplast structure and function. Molybdenum converts nitrate into nitrite. Typo there. That should be nitrite, Nitrite, and then ammonia. Required by symbiotic nitrogen-fixing bacteria in nitrogen-fixing plants, the legumes. Zinc is a key part of enzymes and proteins, helps produce growth hormones, assists in internode elongation. And then we have carbon, oxygen, and hydrogen. Carbon can be from the soil, or carbon can be sourced from the atmosphere. Oxygen and hydrogen sourced from the atmosphere. So you can see that even at very small ppm, parts per million, in the soil, these micronutrients provide a significant benefit to the plant. So our goal here is through soil testing to note deficiencies and work to optimize to get every one of these, both macro and micronutrients, within the range that will efficiently help the plant. If depending on the type of production that we are growing from our production stock, whether we are growing from clones or whether we are growing through germinated seed and seedlings. You can see on the left, the clone has a fibrous root. And you can see on the right that the seeded plant has a taproot and fibrous roots. Only seeds are capable of growing that taproot. So clonal culture grows fibrous roots without a taproot. A clone will not be able to develop the taproot when we understand the root structure of individual plants and how that root system functions in relation to those nutrients that I just mentioned. The taproot is the central and most important root for soaking up or taking up those nutrients from soil solution. So we can, from this piece of science, we can, extract information that will let us think in the way that a plant grown from seed can very efficiently take up nutrients from soil solution through the taproot, but plants that are started from clone production may be and probably will be less efficient at taking up those nutrients. So another reason why we want to have nutrients in the right percentages, in the right amounts. We want the pH to be adjusted in the right range because that also affects nutrient uptake. So everything that we know is involved in nutrient uptake, we want to be in the best place possible to make it easy for that plant produced by a clone to pull up its nutrients. Leighton, off to you for compost.
Yeah, and thank you, Chip. I think this was probably one of the most important pieces for people to understand is how these nutrients function in plants and how they make the plant function better in the long run. And we'll get into testing more, but I thought that, that was a really important piece that a lot of people are missing. So compost. Do-it-yourself compost is by far the best because you're using your local inputs. So basically, you're harvesting greens and browns from your area. Therefore, that is going to give you the best possible results because those nutrients are what your plants actually want. So I definitely encourage everybody to make their own compost. There are charts online which will indicate the different C to N ratios of the plants that are growing naturally around you. Generally speaking, we talk about using 66% browns or carbon source and 34% N or nitrogen or green source, green materials. And that's just a rule of thumb, and you can get a little bit more dialed in when you really to use one of those charts to determine exactly what your C to N ratio is. There's a big difference between biological compost and commercial green waste compost. Biological compost is and should be your goal. The whole point of that is you want to get those protozoa, the saprophytic fungi, your yeasts, and all of the nematodes. And the only way to do that, again, is to compost your greens and browns, and you will never find in a commercial compost anything other than a bacterial dominance. So if you do end up having to use commercial green waste compost, it's recommended that you use some kind of inoculant to get the biologicals to function in that and grow out. Long term, if you let the commercial compost sit out for a year or two, if it has been properly matured or aged, it will those organisms will come back, but it's just a time thing. A lot of people get freaked out about Octanobacteria. They are present in all soil systems, but again, with a good biological diversity, they will be kept at bay and not a problem. If you see tons of them, then obviously you have something out of whack, and therefore that compost is not suitable to be used at that point in time. It needs to further age and get inoculated somehow. Next slide, the value of compost. Compost provides a biological food source for the biology in your soil. It's a wonderful way to ensure that your plant's going to have a good nutrient source, as well as provide a diverse system for the biology to pull nutrients from and release back to the plant. A really good biological compost can be liquefied. In liquefaction, you've taken the real labor and equipment needs out of play. Top dressing compost on fields is labor intensive and equipment expensive. So liquefying your compost is the ideal way. You've all been taught about compost teas and compost extracts. And again, those are liquefying it. ATP is the energy currency of the plant. The idea is to reduce that so the plant can focus more on producing the things that you're looking for, primarily size, yield, and secondary metabolites. So by releasing or taking the pressure off of that energy currency, it can be focused more, put back into use in those key things that you're trying to do. So again, with a foliar feed, you're reducing the amount of energy that plant has to put into those exudates, push down into the soil, have the minerals mined from the bacteria released by the protozoa back to the root source, back up into the plant. It's quite a lot of energy. Carbon is the key to this too. The good compost will have a lot of carbon in it. Carbon is the energy currency for biology to do their work. So it's important to understand that in using some of these nutrients, specifically nitrogen, you either burn carbon or you burn water to convert that to ammonia, to be released back to the plant in a form of nitrogen that it can uptake. So keep that in mind. And again, the value of compost is that it has a wonderful cross-section of nutrients, especially if you've been making it with a lot of diverse ingredients to begin with. Next slide. That's back to you, Chip.
So I'm going to go through a little bit of the definitions here on what compost is, and not definition in the sense that it is a material that is a collection of organic feedstocks that is decomposed in biological processes in the presence of oxygen. So, very simply, you can think about if you have three things that come together at any one time, you will begin to compost. Those three things are a piece of organic matter, a microbe, and some moisture. And as long as all of that happens in the presence of oxygen, biological decomposition will begin. There are specific ways. We have a carbon to nitrogen ratio. So, Leighton did it at 60-30, per 60%, 30%. That's just about it. We want to start with between a 20-to-1 and 30-to-1 carbon to nitrogen ratio to begin composting. Typically think of the browns as carbon sources and the greens as nitrogen sources. And Leighton referenced, lists that everything that's out there from leaves to sawdust to food waste to citrus, like apple pomace, what's left after producing apple cider, everything out there has a carbon to nitrogen ratio. So look at what your feedstocks are and then develop a carbon to nitrogen ratio. If you have too much carbon in relation to nitrogen, it will take a long time and you will not be composting, but you will have a biological rotting down of your substrate or feedstocks. That's what happens with leaf mold. You will not generate high heat in a high carbon pile. If this ratio of 20-to-1 to 30-to-1 carbon to nitrogen ratio, you should be able to generate core temperatures of 137 degrees and be able to break down any toxins that might be in there, any pathogens that might be in there, and any unwanted weed seed, if that may happen to be in there. If you get too much nitrogen in relation to carbon, you will get way too much odor. So you will have that, and then a lot of the nitrogen that gets produced will convert to ammonia, which is a gas, and it will off-gas, and you'll end up with little or no retained nutrient. Compost should be between 35% and 50% organic matter as a finished product dry weight. So when we do a compost chemistry test and we look at the dry weight readings, that's what we want to see, organic matter up at that percentage. If you are producing a material that is only 20% organic matter, that is either reflective of your feedstocks or reflective of your process. The opposite of organic matter is ash, and ash is the byproduct of combustion in a compost pile. So if you have high numbers of ash and low numbers of organic matter, that means your process is burning and converting organic matter into ash, which does you no good. So if these two numbers offset each other, but this is your target. You want retained nutrients. You should be looking to get somewhere between 1.5 and 2% nitrogen. Ideally, you're at 0.5% of phosphorus and 0.5% potassium. So retained nutrients are important. And of that nitrogen that is produced or is retained in a composting pile or an operation, the majority of that nitrogen is in the organic form and will break down over a period of time. There should be some percentage of it that is in the plant available soluble form of nitrate and ammonium that will directly provide a bump to the crop. Moisture should be plus or minus 50%. And that should translate to a bulk density, which bulk density is a measure of air pockets and solids of roughly 1,000 to 1,200 pounds per cubic yard. Should be the finished weight. If you're producing a compost that weighs 1,600 pounds per cubic yard, too much water, not enough airspace, or too much bulk and it's compacted and not enough air pockets. So bulk density is the relationship of pockets of air to solid material. And of course, the pockets of air contain oxygen, and oxygen critically important to support the desirable aerobic organisms. You want a diversity of biological life. You want good bacterial activity. And your real goal, as Leighton said, it's pretty easy to produce a bacterial compost, but definitely more valuable to produce a fungal-based compost. So we strive to get a compost with good fungal activity. And, just to give you a couple of quick things on compost, if you are doing a windrow type compost with your own feedstocks that you have, and you have the appropriate carbon to nitrogen ratio, you should be pretty much done the active composting process in 40 to 45 days. So at the end of 40 to 45 days, as long as you turn it and all parts of that compost windrow sit at the core for 3 or 4 or 5 days at a time, in 45 or 50 days, you will not see any recognizable initial ingredients. So it will start to form a homogeneous material. At that point in time, it can be taken out of the windrow and put into a larger curing pile where it is going to sit for several months until it reaches maturity. Maturity is determined by the carbon to nitrogen ratio dropping down from 20 to 1 to 30 to 1 to 12 to 1 to 20 to 1. That is a sign of maturity. The other sign of maturity is when bacterial activity slows down to 10% or less. So those are how we govern mature compost. You can also do it yourself by a skilled nose. And if you smell a bark mulch or ammonia or like a turpentine smell, it's immature. If you dig in or put a bucket into a compost pile and steam comes out, it's immature. Immature compost is a real problem if you use it. It wants to finish itself off. Once it starts, it wants to take its way to completion. It will pull nitrogen from the soil to drive the continuation of the degradation process, the decomp. That can be damaging to the plant. Chlorophyll decreases, photosynthesis is reduced, carbohydrate production drops, and the plants weaken. So if you were doing something in side dressing, rows or top dressing a pot or beds, and you happen to get immature compost, you can do significant damage in a very short time. There's really no set application rate with compost because all compost is not created equal. Wide differences in organic matter, nutrients, biological activity, and maturity. When liquefying compost, you need to start with the best compost you can possibly get or be able to jumpstart inferior material. Otherwise, you will end up with an inferior liquid material. So because of all of these differences in compost, it's important to test yours. And it stands to reason that, as we know, organic matter is the home for the microbial community. If we have a compost that's 20% organic matter, there are not as many microbes living in there as a compost with 45% organic matter. So that fraction of organic matter makes all the difference in nutrient, in biological activity, and the success of using it as a mature product. Here's an example of a compost composition analysis where and I'm not going to go through all these numbers with you, but just showing you the extent to which we test. This laboratory is in Maine. It was founded by one of the top 2 or 3 leading compost experts in the world, and probably does the most complete. This is just one page of a 5-page report on one sample, and you can see it's giving me all of the factors. Where my cursor is here, you can see this particular material is 49.3% organic matter. So it's where we want it to be. Carbon to nitrogen, it is stable at 14.9 to 1. So we have good stability here. 60% moisture. This batch was a little bit wet, but that was cured out of it a little bit after this fact. And then we've actually looked at this for germination. This particular test looks at any herbicide residues that might be in there. If you're buying commercial compost, you never know what's in there. So you can see here, there is no inhibition. So we have a material that we've determined is not plant toxic. So that's the extent of testing that we go to. This laboratory gives us a compost matrix scorecard where it looks at everything. And this incorporates biological life and carbon dioxide respiration of the biomass. And down here in the bottom, it classifies the compost as its best use. And the 1 and 2, the first and second choice for this is a garden compost or a nutrient compost. So this would be considered a very high quality compost that would be an excellent addition to a cannabis grow. And here is the biological analysis, where this is Soil Food Web New York biological laboratory. There's others in the country, but up here we're looking at active bacteria, total bacteria, active fungal, total fungal hyphal diameter. Everything is good or excellent at the top. Protozoa numbers well above range here. Ciliates, the measure of anaerobes. Anaerobic is high because this pile sat for a bit and it got heavy rain. Once we went into this with the loader and flipped it, got some oxygen in there, ciliates dropped right down. This is 1.89 to 1 fungal to bacterial. So this is borderline on a fungal dominant compost. Very desirable. And over here on the right, this compost, through biological processes only, independent of any inputs, will produce or make available over 200 pounds of nitrogen per acre over a 90-day period. So that is a significant increase in soil available nitrogen without using a fertilizer. Back to you.
Soil horizontal system. This was something that I put together for the cannabis community because the plant is a very heavy feeder. The idea was to help mitigate moisture movement in the soil profile, help to provide a better system for biological activity, as well as create a good, sturdy, and fast-growing matrix for the plant roots. So E would be the alluvial layer. A is the A horizon, which we've discussed already, and O obviously is the top or the super soil or the organic matter layer. I came up with an easy way to remember it, 1, 2, 3. So if you have in an 18-inch pot, if you have an E horizon of 2.5 inches, the A would be 5 and the O would be 10. This is a quick, easy way to keep this in mind. I just recently had a friend of mine who's been working hard with soil moistures from in Cinnabar unit of measurement from 0 to 200. And he came back with me and said, your A horizon functions absolutely perfectly in mitigating moisture and maintaining an even moisture content throughout the entire pot. So once again, this has been proven a number of times to be extremely functional in containers, beds for this cannabis plant. Now, again, the function of this is the A is the heart and lungs of the system. Any excess moisture goes down into the E horizon. Because the E horizon is rock and sand, that sand helps to deliver the moisture and mitigate it back up into the A horizon as needed. The A horizon, again, helps to take the excess moisture from the E, move it back up into the O as the top of the pot or bed dries out due to wind or sun. And again, the O horizon provides a very fast rooting area or easy rooting area, and also a great place to feed the biology. Again, the A is a critical because without sand, silt, and clay, what is your mycorrhizae going to do? There's nothing to function. There's nothing to work off of. And again, all bacteria are not designed just to decompose. A lot of them do need silt, clay, and sand to mine the nutrients that the plant is requesting. So its function is very important. Some of the added benefits to this system is, again, its ability to maintain an even moisture level throughout the entire pot. In my experiences, the hardest thing to do is to make sure that you're maintaining that moisture level. You're not too wet and you're not too dry. So again, this system functions very well at helping you with that. And again, it provides the microbial food for all different arrangements of organisms, not just one specific targeted. And if you want to hear more about this, you can go to Shaping Fire, episode 54.
So we'll skip through this, and I'm assuming that there'll be chances for questions at some point, and they can be directed back to Leighton and I. I know both of us are, certainly available, to answer questions. So if there are, questions, and as you're listening to this recording, perhaps they can be channeled so that we could have a spot of answering as might be needed. Let me slide into soil testing. So soil testing should be the basis for all inputs. Those inputs may be NPK or micronutrients that we know are going to be those catalysts in stimulating something within the plant itself. Inputs can also be those materials that we refer to as soil amendments that could be amending or influencing in a positive way biological life in the soil. So we're not only putting things in there, to directly affect the plant. It's most important that we think of growing this plant as part of a system. We would be sorely lacking in, producing the best quality plant if we only focus on the plant. We have to provide equal focus to what we see above ground and what we do not see below ground. So soil testing helps us to monitor this through a production cycle. A complete diagnostic package test includes soil chemistry, soil texture, and soil biological life. Soil testing allows us to properly manage the A horizon and make supplemental input when it needs it. Inputs are tailored to meet specific needs of the cannabis plant or to meet specific needs of the biological fraction. One of the things that we do with advanced testing is, after testing soil chemistry and understanding what is in the soil and what is there naturally and what is there from our applied materials, the next step to be truly accurate is to do tissue testing of the plant. And tissue testing of the plant tells us exactly what the plant is processing from the soil. Soil chemistry gives us the organic matter percentage, total organic carbon. Like carbon and organic matter are the same thing. So if those two numbers are the same, They are found that generally they are determined on an LOI, loss on ignition, meaning they weigh the sample of soil, they burn it, and then they weigh it, and the organic matter material burns off, and what is left is the mineral content. Therefore, by definition, the percentage of organic matter is the weight of the soil. If organic matter is 5%, it means that 5% of the weight of that sample was organic matter. We find the pH, the relative acidity or alkalinity. We know that the cannabis plant wants to grow in slightly acidic conditions, meaning, close to or just below 7.0, 6.4 to 7.0. So there's a direct relationship between nutrient uptake and the pH. So the pH needs to be within that desired range for all the nutrients that the cannabis plant needs to be successfully taken up by either a taproot or a fibrous root system. And then cation exchange capacity, as I described, the negatively charged electrical sites in the humus fraction of organic matter and some of the clays that hold on to by electrical charge potassium, magnesium, calcium, ammonium, nitrogen. We get micronutrients. We understand that they're mineral salts. They are determined on this test. We get the base saturation, meaning of those exchange sites, potassium, calcium, and magnesium, the three base cations, and how much of each one is attracted at any given time. And this is given to us in percentages. Different methods of extraction. So when you choose a laboratory, you pick one and you stick to it, because there are different methods of extraction that involve mixing that soil sample with an acid. That acid may be a weak acid or it may be a strong acid. So if we have a bag of soil and we do a weak acid extraction, the acid will solubilize a portion of the nutrient that's in there, and it will give us that number in parts per million or pounds per acre. If we use a strong acid extraction, the acid is much stronger. It extracts most of the nutrient that is in that sample, and therefore we get a much higher number. Same soil, same bag, two different methods of extraction. One relatively low number, which most people think is reflective of what nature is doing herself. And then the much higher number, which gives us the total number that's there. But we have to understand that it is not all available, that the largest portion of that is still water insoluble and needs to have a microbial interaction in order to break it down. It's a soil chemistry test. Again, I won't go through it, but just goes to show you that we have the organic matter fraction, we have our macronutrients in the middle, the pH over here, we have base saturation here, and then we have our micronutrients down there. So interpreting this soil test is about trying to achieve balance that is correct for the plant that we are trying to grow. The next test is a gradation analysis, also called soil textural analysis or particle size analysis. All soil particles, from the microscopic sheets of clay to the largest grains of sand, are characterized or cataloged by their size by definition. So clay, microscopic; silt, the next largest; sand, visible to the naked eye. All from parent rock material. Gives us an idea on that soil's ability to compact itself, the ability to hold on to moisture, sand versus clay, the individual percentages, nutrient holding, cation exchange capacity. All can be either determined or very strong guidelines on what we might expect. And then here we have our three different sand, silt, and clay percentages. And then those numbers are then put to the USDA textural triangle, and they are assigned a soil textural classification. and in this case, it was a sandy loam. Third test that we do is a biological analysis, indicator of biological life in the soil, a measure of biological activity by species. There's a process of identification, counting, and extrapolation. We get a fungal to bacterial ratio, and we get that number of estimated plant available nitrogen per acre over a 90-day period. Here is a soil biological analysis. Then you can see up top we have active fungi, total fungi, active bacteria, total bacteria. So this is a bacterial soil. The total fungal to bacterial is 2.65 to 1. So strongly, it's a strongly bacterial situation. Flagellates and amoeba down here in the middle are both low. So it's the flagellates and amoeba that feed on active bacteria and release that nutrient, specifically nitrogen, to the plant. That's not happening efficiently at all in this soil. So this soil can only produce between 25 and 50 pounds of nitrogen per acre over a 90-day period, which is very low. In most soils, we're shooting for at least that number to be 150. So this soil needs a lot of work. It is good in the sense that it's 41% endomycorrhizal colonization. It's just that they're not functionally active and doing a lot of work for us at the present time. So this test result would indicate to us that we might need some carbon source in there, either from a compost, from a humate, from a humic acid, from a compost tea, something to sort of get this back into the right balance here. Sorry, duplicate slide. Latent supplemental testing.
Excuse me. So I'm a big fan of doing what I call a deep pit test. It's basically you'd use an excavator or backhoe and dig a trench like the picture on the right shows you. The first thing you'll notice in one of these is if there is an anaerobic layer, it will be a black line. It can be deep or it can be very shallow, running through the soil horizons. What that is an indicator of the fines, which would be silt or organic matter that worked their way down into the soil and stopped and locked themselves up. And then usually that layer, if it's dark black, it'll have a nasty odor to it as well. By seeing if you have an anaerobic layer, now you know the limitations of what you're up against. If you've got a deep rooting plant like a seed from a cannabis plant grown from a seed, you're going to have issues with that because that taproot is going to go very deep down into that soil. It's going to hit that anaerobic layer and you're going to melt it off or you're going to get diseases that way. So this is a great way to indicate what the limitations of your soil are. The second is it's giving you a mapping of the horizon. So now you know where your A horizon ends and the B horizon starts. So you may want to actually go up and build the soil up a little bit more or use raised beds to provide a faster growing soil system. Obviously, the B horizon is going to be a lot more compacted. This also gives you an idea whether you need to till or not. If you have that anaerobic layer, it's probably a good idea that you do till it and break it up. And then after you've tilled, you can apply a really good, rich compost extract and really start jump starting that soil back into play. Once you have this test pit open, it's very easy to determine where you should do your perk test. A perk test is basically pouring a certain amount of water into a hole to determine how quickly it drains. This is very important because especially in high clay soils, you're going to have issues. If you have slow draining, you're going to get anaerobic pockets where you plant your plant. And that's again is a real problem. And lastly is what's called an infiltration test, which is basically using a cylinder to deter cylinders that's been pushed into the ground so that water cannot leak out underneath the sides of it. Then you pour the water on top into that cylinder, and then you measure how long it takes for that soil to infiltrate water. This is a really important test to determine if you have high amount of soil aggregates, which is the key to a healthy soil system. If it does not drain, chances are you do not have good aggregation, and you also are looking at probably erosion, especially if you till it. So again, infiltration test is a really important one to do. Next slide, field production. What you can and cannot do. The biggest problem with trying to re-amend a field is you have to take the time. You can't just go out there and throw all the nutrients you're missing on that soil all at once, or you will have catastrophic failure. You'll probably kill all the biology. You'll definitely destroy any soil structure that was present. So again, you have to go real slow with modifying fields. A lot of times it's best to even cover crop them in between applications of nutrients to, again, start to build that tilth or aggregation back into play. So mineral applications have to be done at certain times of the year. There's certain things you cannot do in the summer, and there's certain things you shouldn't do in the fall or spring due to levels of rain. You're going to basically wash your applications right off the soil. So there's a lot of when and when not to do involved in these amending large scale soil systems. Another thing you have to take into consideration is the existing biota. You have different biological constituents in different parts of the country, as well as in different types of soil systems. So if you go in and try to modify these again and try to do it too quickly, you are going to affect it. Or you could, if you're using a biological tea or a bugs in a jug from a different area, you may just be wasting your money, because that's just going to be a biostimulant and not a bioinoculant. Another thing you need to take into consideration is extreme weather. This is the new norm. Storms are getting stronger. You're getting larger amounts of rain or no rain at all. So these are important factors to take into consideration, that the typical weather maps or predictions, the Farmer's Almanac and stuff like that, have become less and less accurate due to extreme weather events. And the last thing to take into consideration is temperatures. Temperatures are also swinging. We're getting cold snaps in the summer and warm gaps or breaks in the winter. Composting on scale. First, most people know about thermophilic. That's where you're using large amounts of large volume of material, traditionally in windrows, as the picture to the right shows you. It is a great way to compost large scale. The only problem is you need to let that compost age. Could take up to a year for that to biologically reactivate. And a lot of people don't have that kind of time, nor do they think far enough in advance to be able to do that. Thermophilic also requires equipment. Once it gets to a certain temperature, you have to turn it. If you do not, that temperature will continue to climb, and you could end up getting to a point where you're producing alcohol. Now, at that point, you're going to have to throw that material away and start all over again. That can be extremely expensive, as is the equipment to turn it. I've seen guys try to turn large static piles with loaders or backhoes. It is effective, but not really efficient. The best systems are these compost turning systems, which are, again, very expensive, often into the hundreds of thousands of dollars. So the other choice is static. You use less nitrogen in a static pile because you're never going to turn it. So again, you really need to know your ratios when you're building this pile, or you're going to get yourself in trouble. So can I use commercial compost? Yes, if you test it to make sure that it is mature. A good friend of mine in Illinois received some immature compost and killed 60 acres of plants. So you really need to know your stuff. And again, it's all about testing. I can't state that hard enough. You can take commercial compost, what I usually consider chemical or chemistry compost, and then you can inoculate it with a good biological inoculant. Again, you need to give that stuff time for that biology to get its foothold and to really spread throughout the pile. But that's the best way to convert a commercial compost into a biological compost. Once it has been inoculated and has been given a chance to really populate, the best and most efficient way to deliver that on scale is to liquefy it and then put it into a spray rig, which many farmers already have in their tool belt. Next slide, please. So back to the whole point of this, how the O affects the A. So that organic matter, that top layer, is critical in helping to build a more nutrient-dense A layer. It provides a instant out of the gate tilth that allows for the gas exchange to happen until the aggregates are completely formed. Again, the EAO horizontal system. That is a way to jumpstart soil aggregates. Also, it's important to understand that the O horizon will provide a better gas exchange system for the A horizon underneath. So as you can see, they're really hand in hand, that they need to be both healthy, biologically active, and then you will get to a really healthy soil system, a functional soil system, very quickly. Next slide. Field biology. The goal here is to first do your test so you know where you're at. A lot of people will just constantly pound soil with compost teas or compost extracts. If you do a test and you realize that you are a perfectly healthy soil system, you're not really doing anything else to increase that biology by doing this. Now, this is where you could use a liquefied commercial compost that has the chemistry but does not have the biology. So again, the testing is really important. Often when you're making a compost extract or a tea, you are just a biostimulant. In other words, providing biology food for the biology. And so again, with the proper testing, you will know whether you need to do this or whether you're just stimulating the existing system. Biological foods, again, when you liquefy compost, you are providing those biology or the bacteria, I should say, a greater source of food that's readily available and easy for them to digest. Another interesting aspect of understanding the entire soil food web is that you, by default, in a super healthy system, are releasing plant hormones through the decomposition of existing matter, specifically the organic matter fraction. Another thing to take in mind is that if you're testing, you will know when to apply and when you do not need to apply. So again, these are labor-saving tricks, and time is money, and labor is not inexpensive. Next slide, supplemental inputs. This has always been a question of, like, how do you amend soil in the middle of a cycle? The easiest way is, of course, to side dress. It's something that you can do in between the rows of crops, as you can see in the picture to the right. Again, without soil testing, this is something that you shouldn't do. If you get your nutrients out of whack, you're going to create even greater problems for plant physical reactions. So please do not do these practices unless you really understand what is going on in your soil. A lot of guys like to front load, and I think that in a large scale hemp production, that's a good idea, because remember, the cannabis plant, whether it's just grown for CBD or THC, is a very heavy feeder. So this is something that you can do to provide, again, organic minerals or organic nutrients into the soil system, with the understanding that as the plant grows, if there is a deficiency, that can still pull it up. Top dressing is a great method for providing compost into, or organic matter into, a low organic matter soil system, but it is expensive. Top dressing takes a lot of work, and generally speaking, you're not supposed to go over, I believe it's 1/4 inch at a time, because then you're going to have a gummy, sticky, tacky surface that will not allow proper gas exchange. So typically it's better to use a liquefied compost in this application and not try to top dress, which again is very difficult to do evenly. Your supplemental inputs you should be targeting soil organic matter. It is probably the foundation of a healthy soil system. And so if you are low on soil organic matter, again, you can top dress or you can liquefy it, and liquefying is obviously the least expensive way to do it. Managing your soil practices. That is again, probably more important than anything. That is doing proper.
There, Chip.
Yeah, we'd lose him.
Yeah, I heard the dogs barking, and then I heard him fall off there for a second. Oh, well,
All right, so
get back on so we could ask you a few of the questions.
let's see what. So these next couple slides are his.
Yes, sir. Can I ask you some of the questions that are in the chat?
Sure, yeah, fire away. Yep.
All right, this one is from Sean R. In an indoor tent or room or grow room, do you think it is possible to construct a microorganism population, perhaps with the addition of mushrooms that will increase CO2 levels to 1,000 to 12,000 or higher? That seems crazy high.
Well, CO2 production in a grow house. I mean, as you increase CO2 levels, you are basically increasing the resource there to undergo photosynthesis. So that's the benefit of increasing CO2 or having a. So, however, there's different ways that CO2 levels can be elevated, but yes, as CO2 levels increase, that's more carbon dioxide to undergo the process of photosynthesis. But that makes the assumption that it goes hand in hand with the other strategies that we talked about that are also instrumental and central to that whole chlorophyll and photosynthesis.
Yes, sir. This next question is from Daniel. Are you guys familiar with any static composting methods like the static pile inoculated compost extension known as SPICE, popularized by Christine Jones, or the Johnson-Su bioreactor? How does the end result of those compare to hot compost?
I'm not directly familiar with either of those two. With some research, I'm sure I would understand it. Static pile means you're not turning it. So you can have an aerated static pile or just a static pile. It's about heat processes and generating heat and then balancing it out in the end when you're in static pile along with C to N ratio. But I do not have direct experience with or knowledge of those two.
Yes, sir. This next question is from Sean. Have you been to old growth forests which have not been touched for hundreds of years and find horizons that are a foot or more deep?
Oh, absolutely. That's exactly what you find. And that's one of those examples of, a very thick layer of the O horizon. And that in the old growth forest, that's exactly where you're going to find some of the deepest O horizons. Yes, absolutely. That's true.
So this next question is from Lena. I juice male plants, but what other plants are beneficial for juicing and providing the proper nutrients?
So that's a question for Leighton because he's done more of the plant juicing than I have. So that falls into his side of the discussion.
I'll save that one for him, sir. This one is from Clay. What are the relationships or ratios between nutrients that you think is ideal? Magnesium to iron, or manganese to iron, calcium to magnesium, etc.
There's all kinds of there's relationships between almost all of that. Relationships between calcium and magnesium. One of the things that Leighton and I are working on, and in a presentation like this, even though we're presenting some pretty technical information, it still is looked at or would be considered a relatively high-level overview of that. But one of the things that he and I are working on are some of these very same, the specific interactions. And relationships. One just off the top of my head, calcium and phosphorus. If calcium levels are too high, phosphorus will be tied up and completely unavailable to the plant. So as well as simply as monitoring, and this is just a basic one, why I'm using this as an example. If you get calcium levels too high in soils and you're going in, the plant is shifting from vegetative to reproductive stage, and you're tying up phosphorus, you can have a problem. So there are relationships across the board between both macro and micronutrients where there are desirable parameters. Leighton and I are actually working on breaking down soil chemistry, which largely hasn't been done in this field, to determine which of these relationships are the ones that we want to pay the most attention to directly related to the cannabis plant. The most basic one that I can tell you is not an interaction between nutrients, but is the pH of the soil. And every nutrient that I mentioned has a desired, or every nutrient that I mentioned will be absorbed by a plant when it is in the desired pH range. So we need to really focus on that. If nothing else happens, the first thing should be to just check the pH of field soil or a container mix and make sure that it is established, because you do not want to play catch up by correcting, because correcting takes a little bit of effort. It's expensive. It takes some time. So having the pH established so that any nutrients that are in the container mix that are applied can be processed by the cannabis plant as efficiently as possible and to the maximum degree that the plant can do it. So there are charts that we can present to you. I have them, not in this PowerPoint, that show every incremental pH range and what the cannabis plant can process at that range. And that's really at the first and foremost, fundamentally at the basis of it all.
Yes, sir. I think a lot of people would appreciate that. Leighton, are you there, bud? Well, I don't know if I just saw him mute that.
I just saw him mute. Yeah.
All right, let's move on to some questions. Leighton, are you there, bud? Live. All right. Next question from Julie. What is the best inoculant to add to compost piles? How do you jumpstart inferior material? Thanks.
So it really if you, I've gone to compost school and studied the whole technical side of composting in addition to my other areas of expertise. And the one thing that was stressed to us is right off the bat on day one is, if you compost properly, you should not have to add anything in there to make it happen more efficiently. It's all about the balance between carbon and nitrogen. And if you get that correct, nothing else is needed, because the biological activity will take care of itself. Remember, if you have moisture, microbe, the moisture, the microbe, and a piece of organic material come together in the right percentage, and C to N is balanced where it should be, or established where it should be, based on what Leighton's, sort of guidelines were and what mine were. Composting is going to happen, and it's going to happen efficiently. So you shouldn't have to jumpstart. There's really no such thing as inferior material. There is just material that is high in carbon and high in nitrogen. And it's really about finding that right balance. I mean, for a cannabis grower, the ideal feedstock is the waste, the cannabis plant itself, what's not the parts that may not be used. And as you break it down, it's going to have some carbon and some nitrogen in those stalks. And one of the things that does happen, if you have the ability with some of the heavier material to grind it first, to take it down, smaller particles compost easier. So rather than put fairly significant branches in there and wait for that to try to break down, which it will. If you have the ability to grind it and reduce the particle size. Think of a wood chip, and then think of sawdust, and then think of which one the microbe can break down the fastest as a carbon source. It's going to be the sawdust, because the sawdust used to be a wood chip, but now it's just a smaller particulate size, much easier for the microbe to attack and break down. Same thing happens with any of your larger feedstocks, is that as you get smaller particle size, you have an easier job for the microbe to break it down.
Now, I have a quick question on that. So when everything is alive and thriving, and we're really now trying to push that microbial world to also help increase just the overall quality and hopefully a little bit of a boost in yield, are we able to add calcium at that point where we're improving, where it is kind of known, at least in the older days, that was like the catalyst, because calcium is only taken up through the transpiration stream? So it was extremely important to make sure that you were getting that calcium to be broken down during the vegetative state to make sure that it was available during that flowering part. Is any of that true? Is it extremely important to get that at the beginning, or is that, again, that more of a bro science that we've kind of lived by?
So when you think of calcium in the plant, calcium is not translocatable from one part of the plant to the other, meaning from below ground to above ground. So we have calcium in the foliage and the bud, everything that we can see there, and we have calcium that's in the root system. So all calcium obviously comes up through the root system, but it doesn't move back and forth between the two. So yes, calcium in balance, if we went back to that slide, and I can actually, let me take you quickly back there while we're talking about that, and we can just, where am I here? And we can actually just look at, so here is which is a great question. Calcium, plant growth and nutrition. So yes, there's that part of the plant. You have to have it available to drive growth. And nutrition is pulling, nutrient in reserve from the soil. So in the root, that's what it's doing. It's bringing in nutrient off of those exchange sites and allowing those nutrients to come in, whatever that may be. Now that not phosphorus, because phosphorus is a positive charge, so it's not held in the soil, right? Phosphorus binds to a sand particle, which actually doesn't have charge. Cell wall, thickening of cell walls, soil salinity, that's the soil part of it. The soil part of it, water. So think of calcium as directly involved in soil structure and allowing water to move through, maintaining the pore space, maintaining the oxygen pockets, all soil particles surrounded on all sides by air containing oxygen, critical for the root, critical for the microbe. Calcium directly responsible for assisting in that. Even penetration of water, reducing salinity in high saline or acidic soils, directly involved the soil, again, CEC sites, but then coming back to the above ground portion of the plant, yes, you don't want to be playing catch up with it. You want to develop a program that you're not looking to shock, boost levels quickly, because that's when you can get into the lockout of phosphorus. So if all of a sudden you find you're moving from vegetative into, the reproductive stage of the plant, and your plant is showing a calcium deficiency, and all of a sudden at that point you come in and try to do a bang correction, you could raise ppms to a level in relation to phosphorus that could lock out phosphorus. It's there, it's in the container, it's in the soil, but you're essentially, the plant, it's going to be locked out and not be able to be processed because of the excess calcium. So yeah, you don't want to play catch up. You do want a program that is going to get your calcium in place, or plan to have your calcium in place by the time that you need it.
That's a little gold nugget, and I appreciate your time on that, Chip, because I feel like a lot of us have gone back and forth over the years on the importance of that. But then it's, we always kind of called it like the Goldilocks principle with a bunch of amendments, but definitely when it comes to calcium. There's a few more questions here. Some of them are probably.
I can finish off these slides myself.
Okay.
The last two are mine, and then you can fire the rest of the questions at me, and we'll go from there. So let me just, fast forward again right up to here. Sorry about the bing, bing, bing through the screens here. And, so this was one of Leighton's slides, but it's go with it. So you do not want soil left bare. So if you're doing field production, you don't want barren soil. Barren soil, you will lose organic matter first. It will oxidize as organic matter is continually exposed to oxygen. It will oxidize. You will actually reduce the organic matter content of the soil. So crop rotation in field crops, crimping, planting a cover crop and crimping it and turning it in, adopting, no-till practices in organic production, for everything from weed control to healthy biologically active soil, crimping the cover crop and turning it in, and then planting right there in those furrows there are where we're planting. So, we're sowing, or transplanting directly into there. Animal grazing builds up organic matter, builds up a body of nutrients. When we're talking about irrigation, we can use drip irrigation, which is delivering water right at the root zone with little or no evaporation. Pivot, irrigation heads. We're looking to, only deliver the water that the plant needs. Excess water actually is hugely detrimental. We want to allow those. The best way to think about irrigation is to focus on a concept called field capacity. Field capacity is the amount of water that should be available there for a crop at every irrigation cycle. We have heavy rain events that we can't control. We have irrigation that we can. There's all different types. There's flood irrigation, water harvesting, there's overhead irrigation, drip irrigation. The concept that all soil particles should be surrounded on all sides by air, and the air contains oxygen. That is called pore space. So every soil should have adequate pore space to successfully grow the crop and to support the biological life. The way we talk about field capacity is we irrigate until all those pockets of air are filled with water. And then when Leighton talked about, digging his test pit and watching, and doing his, water infiltration tests. So then once those air pockets are all filled with water, then the natural percolation time in an individual soil for all of the freestanding water to drain out of those pockets of air, returning us to particles of soil that are wet, and then air pockets have returned. That is field capacity. So when we irrigate, we should be irrigating to field capacity. Some final thoughts that we put together, just that we want to drive home, and the core concepts that we put together here. We've identified two different types of culture: field grown and container grown. Container grown could be inside or it could be outside. In any of those scenarios, understanding the soil from the chemistry perspective as well as the biological perspective is critically important. And if you take the time to understand this, to understand the testing process, I guarantee you it will save you money over time. It will generally allow you to target your inputs, use less inputs, eventually reduce inputs if it's a field soil, and continually improve the quality of the finished crop. We're looking to impart the basic concept of feeding the soil so that the soil feeds the plant. Synthetic fertilizers that are largely water soluble directly feed the plant. We want to do exactly the opposite. We are looking to introduce inputs to the soil to build the soil from the biological perspective, to balance chemistry within the soil, and then the soil and the biological life in turn will do what needs to happen to support the plant. Understand the importance of horizontal soil systems. The way Leighton has laid out his modified, O horizon in container production, maybe moving away from that, the super soils where you just have one homogeneous mix there, and try to think more about stratification in there and coming up with these different horizons so that as the root of the plant moves through a bed or a container, it is getting what it needs when it needs it. Learn how to manage a modified A horizon in a container, that we are doing the largest amount of our growing in the A horizon. In a container, it is slightly different by definition than it is in field production, but nevertheless understanding that we're managing there. For field production, what we do to the O horizon affects the A horizon in a beneficial way. So things that we apply to the surface or lightly work into the top few inches of the horizons will find its way down into the A horizon and improve it in a beneficial way. Managing the crop, really in a nutshell, managing the cannabis crop is about effectively monitoring and working with the A horizon. And the more we can understand what is actually happening in the A horizon and how we can best balance the nutrient fraction and support biological life, the better, the more cost effective, and the more effectively we'll be able to produce the crop.
We have our show every Thursday. He's on it. So he must be having some real technical difficulties right now. Some of these questions, sir, I'm going to rattle them off. If you don't know them, I think they might be more geared for Leighton.
Okay.
But they were upvoted by the group here.
Okay.
Taylor wanted to know, what's the minimum depth to utilize the horizon system?
That's a Leighton question.
I do think I've heard him say before, starting out at a foot, but
that would have been my off the cuff, guess without running it by him.
Yeah, and I want to make sure I don't misquote him or anything, but we'll get back to that question for sure. Again, this question from Julie's probably the same thing there. What is the ideal carbon to nitrogen ratio for a static pile?
You still want to go with that 20-to-1 to 30-to-1. It's just that is sort of your basic guideline for either windrow or static pile. There is some flexibility, but I describe composting as 50% science and 50% art. And it's you get an intuitive understanding of what it takes to make it work. Static piles generally, unless they're air-cooled static piles, depending upon, starting at that 30-to-1 carbon to nitrogen ratio, you can generate some pretty significant heat. So that's what you want to. It all depends when, Leighton and I have talked about this, is that, I work with one composter that generates 160 degrees in the core of a static pile because it sits for 100 days at that pile. And based on his carbon to nitrogen ratio, that's what he gets. I tested all through the 4 phases of his static pile operation. And what I found was I wasn't getting the higher level predators at the high heat, but they were repopulating, and I was getting them in the end when the temperature came back down to ambient temperature. If you are trying to generate or to grow higher level predators, you typically want to keep the heat on the lower side, down to 135 to 137 degrees. So when you are doing a static pile and trying to keep temperature down, you go to the higher side of carbon and the lower side of nitrogen. So that's the art, so that's taking the core science of what it takes to make composting happen, and then by applying the art to it to tweak that to what you're trying to directly achieve from it.
Yes, sir. There's somebody in the cannabis community. His name is Calacamus Coots. I don't know if you're familiar with him, but he was another one there that was really explaining a lot of these things. So I feel like it's nice to have the scientific side of things, bringing everything full circle for us. I got a few more questions. I might be able to answer some of these if you can't answer them. In a living soil environment, what issues would Alabama jumpers create, considering they can tunnel 14 inches into clay?
That probably wouldn't be me.
So I am experimenting with Alabama jumpers. I find for the most part, as long as I'm running them with, I use dairy cow isopods with the springtails, it seems like there's enough stuff that is breaking down where things really start to churn. I make sure that I always have a light on, and for the most part, I've never had any issues with the Alabama jumpers coming out of the pots or anything like that. I make sure that I feed those on a continual basis, and they're going to, like you're saying, they're going to build those long dissolved oxygen channels. So my goal is to use bigger, large pots, like 100-gallon fabric pots. And then you can use the smaller pots for the red wigglers. I also like to use the larger pots for the African night crawlers and the European night crawlers. But I feel like there's a lot still to learn about the Alabama jumpers and really what they are doing to that system, because there is a lot of benefits of also using lava rock at the bottom of your beds or your fabric pots. I feel like the real consensus is still out on some of that stuff. If it's better to, go through the effort of farming Alabama jumpers or just using lava rock. But when I have used lava rock with Alabama jumpers, it does seem like they kind of die over time, moving throughout that system on the bottom. All right.
I'm in here, guys. I got back by a phone.
Excellent. We got a lot of questions for you, buddy.
All right, fire away.
All right. How many inches should we set up? The first question when you weren't on here, when you're setting things up for the horizontal system, what's the minimum depth that you would use?
You can go as small as 12 inches, but, I tend to lean toward giving yourself a little bit more room, like an 18-inch deep. Sure. But it is designed to go as small as, like literally the smallest rock you can find. So you could go down to a 12-inch pot or even an 8-inch pot, but I just don't see you gaining the kind of impact that you want unless and if you tried to transplant that pot, like if you up potted it, the pot would fall apart. Your system would fall apart. So I tend to tell people to stay in one size pot. And if you want to transplant into it, you're transplanting into the horizon. So it's no big deal.
Yeah, anytime I've tried to mess around with smaller fabric pots or any kind of smaller system in general, you really have to hover over that and micromanage that, which I just don't see as far as my personal time and understanding how, there's only really 24 hours, right, to get a lot of this stuff done. So managing my time is way more important than a lot of things. And I feel like when we do use those larger soil mediums, we're able to take some of that time back for ourselves.
Agreed.
All right. So Julie wants to know, how many inches should we set up at the AEO horizons in a container, 15-gallon pot?
It would all be based on the depth. So again, if it's an 18-inch deep pot, you'd be 2.5 inches would be your E horizon, 5 inches would be your A horizon, 10 inches would be your O horizon.
Yes, sir. This question is from Sean. Do you gain a linear, exponential, or no advantage utilizing a deeper raised soil bed? Example, 18 inches high versus a 30 inches, which would move my O layer from 9 inches to 15 inches.
Again, this is designed to set up once, so it doesn't really matter the depth. As long as you have those balanced minerals in the A horizon, which function as the heart and lungs of the system, it can be deep. It could be really deep. But again, it's like there's a point where, unless you're trying to grow a 12 or 14 foot high, blue dream or something, you don't need that depth. So I would just say, keep that in mind. It's based on, what is your end goal? Are you doing seed or are you doing clone? Because if you're doing clone, you don't need the depth. But if you are doing by seed and you're trying to grow a monster plant, then you need depth.
This question is from Lena. I juice male plants, but what other plants are beneficial for juicing and providing the proper nutrients?
Oh, I love the idea of juicing a male plant. That's great. You're giving that hormone right back to them. But you just basically look at any type of plant, like say a legume, say a clover. You're juicing that. You're getting all of those plant enzymes. You're getting all of that plant's cells, which are loaded with all kinds of goodies, from easy water to oreganellos. So by juicing it or pressing it, you're getting all of the goodies that plant would normally have, and providing it right quick and fast in a biological food source for the biology to easily uptake it. And in some cases, if you're releasing tertiary metabolites, those would be plant available out of the gate. So just look at whatever plant. If you're looking for stinging nettle, comfrey's another good one. Any kind of accumulator plant, as long as it's being grown in healthy soil and not contaminated soil, will provide a tremendous boost to that plant, to your cannabis plant.
Yeah, stinging nettle is a twofer. What I like to refer to as a twofer, because it helps me with my allergies in the summer, especially in June and all that. Using that stuff. All right, another question from Sean. When you add composting worms to a standard living soil / super soil, how many cycles do you believe you can successfully run before rice hulls and other aeration starts to break down and you run the risk of large pockets of aerobic sections? I think he means anaerobic sections.
Well, that's here again, the beauty of the the EAO horizontal system is that the A horizon is preventing the fines that are coming out of the super soil from getting down into it and penetrating it. And the A horizon is preventing, or the sand in the E horizon is preventing the A horizon from contaminating it. So the key is to prevent those migrations, those fines, as I call them, from migrating down into your water area, your E horizon, because once they get down into that, then you're creating an anaerobic environment. But if it's just sand and rock and no organic matter, you have no issues whatsoever with the E horizon. You will not get anaerobic pockets. And again, I usually recommend that if you have say a 2.5 inch E horizon, you have a 2.5 inch deep water reservoir outside of your pot, like it could be a saucer or a plate. A lot of pots come with those. You can get the little thing to put underneath it, so when you water it, you can see the water coming out of the bottom. That's a great way of monitoring how high your E horizon water level is without sticking something into the pot. And it also prevents you from overflowing the pot. In other words, getting that water table up into the A horizon, which you do not want to do. That would be a good way to get the A horizon to go anaerobic.
Well
Does that make sense?
Absolutely, man. All right. From Mike, Can you review the process of wildcrafting rocks, pebbles, sand, silt, and clay, along with processing them, please?
Absolutely. So when wildcrafting, I always recommend people use common sense. They go into the wild with a spiritual awareness and a positive energy. I usually try to tell people to, bring a gift. If you're going to go in and collect something, a 5-gallon compound bucket of something, bring something in with you. Bring something off of your land that's healthy. So if I'm going to wildcraft rocks, what I'm looking for is jagged rocks. You do not want smooth ones. The smooth ones have a polish, which inhibits the bacteria from setting up their biofilm and mining the material. So you're always looking for jagged rock. In the case of an 18-inch pot, which we're going to stick with for now as an example, the maximum height you want that jagged rock to be is 2.5 inches, because that's the height of your horizon. So that's your start point, is you find jagged rock state. And another key to it is look for different colored rock. Every color represents a different mineral. So you want browns, you want reds, you want blues, you want greens, you want every color rock you can possibly find that fits into that 2.5 inch or less size. So there's your rocks. Now your sand, you want a coarse sand. You do not want white powdery sand. That will cause problems. So you're looking for a tan, a brown, a yellow. Again, diverse colors are always great. I usually suggest people go to where rivers meet the ocean and go off to the side. And now you're going to get biologically active sand. In other words, there will be biofilm on it. So there will be existing bacteria that are mining it. That bacteria may end up to be a food source for other bacteria, or it may just stay there and continue to mine happily away and provide those raw minerals back to the regular nutrient cycling system of your pot. So now we get into a little bit more complex. So right away, you've built your E-horizon, you've put in your pebbles, you've tamped down your wet sand. Make sure that there are no air pockets whatsoever in that E-horizon. So you're going to want to moisten it and then slightly tamp it down with a trowel. Now we're going to start talking about harvesting for the A-horizon. So you need sand, silt, clay, and organic matter. The organic matter is your O-horizon mix. So you mix your O-horizon and you mix a little extra, 20%, that is used in the A-horizon. Silt is difficult. Silt is generally, I tell people to go where an old pond was, or a seasonal pond. That pond floor is going to be vast. Of the majority of that pond floor is going to be silt. The other place is oxbows, where rivers used to run, but they no longer run. There would be a nice source of dried out silt. You can also wildcraft wet silt, but that you have to dry out. If you do not dry it, it'll be clumpy and you will not get a homogeneous A-horizon mix. As far as clay is concerned, I generally tell people to hike up a drainage ditch or a river or stream that is seasonal. You'll see through erosion pockets of clay. And again, you do not want to use primary clay. Primary clay is white and has no nutritional value. You're looking for browns, blues, reds, grays. Anything with color will indicate a mineral presence. Here again, the clay is going to be usually in nature. It's going to hold some moisture, so you're going to want to dry that out so that you can mix it homogeneously. If it's clumpy, you're going to have to break it up. So you're looking for something that you can roll in your fingers into a tiny snake and it stays together, but you don't want something that is so bound up that it won't break apart. It's critical that you get it into a form where it is easily mixed into the overall soil profile. You may, in this case, if you had a problem with a very clumpy clay, you may have to add water and stir it up and then evaporate the water. So that can be time consuming. Another source for finding some of these minerals or raw materials would be going to your town U.S. Geological Survey Department. Parks Department will usually be able to direct you to them, and they can tell you, oh, there's an old quarry here, oh, there's an old clay pit there, there's an old sand pit there, and they'll give you directions to get there. And they may ask you to pay a $25 fee for collecting materials, which is, very affordable. And you're not wasting time searching for this stuff. You can go right to the source. But again, know where you're getting it. You do not want to be wildcrafting near a big agricultural runoff because you're going to get herbicides or other pesticides. You want to be wildcrafting in natural areas that haven't been industrial parks or anything like that, or old gold mines or anything like that. You want to avoid any potential toxic influence when you're wildcrafting. All right, so now we have clay, we have silt, we have the sand that you've already collected for the E horizon, and now your organic matter is the O horizon that you've already prepared. Now you take those 4 pieces, you mix them at 17% clay, 13% silt, 20% organic matter, 50% coarse sand. My suggestion is you put it into a cement mixer, not a mortar mixer. The cement mixer, if you look at the action of it, it blends it perfectly. It homogenously, through the interactions of the way the cement mixer is functioning in a round, but yet has channels to lift the material up and then drop it back down, you're going to get a wonderful mix. Generally speaking, I go to soil blenders and I have them mix it when I'm doing scale. But if I was just doing a small pot or a small raised bed, that would be the process that I would use, is some kind of way to mix that homogenously together. And then the O horizon is relatively easy. Once you've got your E in place, now you place your A horizon. Do not compact it. You want it to be light and fluffy. And I can even go so far as to suggest you use a pointed spade to kind of create ripples in the top of that A horizon to create more surface area, so that when you put your O horizon in there, there's more surface area for it to contact with. Eventually, the roots go down in there and they will open up those channels and start working the A-O horizon level together in a more homogeneous. So eventually you'll almost end up with 3 different horizons in that place. The interaction between those 2 horizons will almost become its own horizon. And then you're off to the races. Now you just add the biology. And typically what I'll tell people is, don't worry about inoculating the E horizon, but I would definitely inoculate the A horizon. And I would always inoculate anything greater than 8 inches in depth. I would inoculate twice. So if it was say I was doing a 10-inch O horizon, I'd put 5 inches in, inoculate it, put another 5 inches and inoculate it again. And when I say inoculate, I'm not talking about soaking it down. I'm talking about spritzing a biological compost tea or extract and spritzing it until it looks like a glazed donut. So again, no puddles, no real big puddles, but just a good saturation. The O horizon is a little bit more difficult because you're not going to get that glazed look to it. So here's where you use common sense. You're just trying to saturate evenly the 2 layers or 3 layers of the O horizon.
Leighton, I really want to take the time, man, to appreciate. I mean, you just broke that down for people that would have taken a long time to probably understand at the level that you just broke that down for everyone. And I know the viewers out there, I know you guys really appreciate when we do that for you guys. So I know that I'm going to be rewinding that to make sure that I understood everything on that, sir. But I've heard you explain it a few times, but I feel like that was the one that at least that was my breakthrough point where I'm really starting to understand the complex subjects that you're speaking on.
Well, it's funny you should say that. Shango Los is putting together a 4-foot indoor grow, and he wanted to use the system based on all the successful and good comments that he's been receiving over the 4 years, I think, or however many years it's been since I suggested people use this. Mm-hmm. And so he pulled out a whiteboard, and we went through this, what I just said, the whole process, and he got confused a couple of times. And I'm like, all right, no, back up. And he wrote the whole thing out so that he would understand it. And then now he's at some point in the near future going to present that on IG. So if you didn't catch all of that, you will be able to see a visual, and he will be walking people through that exact process.
And that, again, man, that's a game changer. I'm sure for a lot of the newer viewers, it's still a little bit over their head. But this is, again, guys, how we're going to be able to not only cultivate indoors, but be able to cultivate indoors for years and years without any worry whatsoever of running out of steam or running out of gas with our living soil systems. This next question is...
The system doesn't collapse, and it provides all of the things that nature provides for natural living soils. And that's the key, is biomimicry.
Right. And now we're off to the races. And that's really the goal in indoor cultivation, is we have to kind of get as close as we can to that old growth forest and as quickly as we can in a microcosm kind of way.
Amen. Well said, brother.
All right, man. You're killing it today. So we're just going to keep rapid firing here. This is from Alex. When building an outdoor raised horizontal bed, should the bed be lined with a non-water permeable material?
No, I don't think so. I mean, the key to a raised bed is understand that thermodynamically, you've changed the performance of the soil because the soil's above ground. So I would put an insulation system, like old logs are ideal. Just make sure they're not loaded with termites, because termites will eat your cannabis plant. And use the logs as an insulation layer. Another thing is that in indoor raised beds, I usually recommend grassroots pots, because they do have a vapor barrier, so that you're not going to lose moisture out of the side of your pots. But if you're not in a completely controlled environment, and I mean heat and cold, if you do have temperature swings, that's where you want to increase or include a insulation factor as well as a moisture barrier, so that you're not losing, again, moisture through the side of your pots. A lot of you guys out there, I'm sure, have had hydrophilic pots where you pour the water on the top and it runs right off the top and down the sides. That it can be prevented by having a moisture barrier. But on the outside, I like to, personally, if I were you and I'm doing a raised bed, I would just do a mound, similar to hugelkultur, right on the top of the soil. And that way you're allowing that surface to help absorb the different fluxes of temperature and, of course, humidity and barometric pressure. All these things play into it. And I would never leave that soil uncover cropped in a mound form.
Right. Nothing in nature, unless it's been disturbed, is bare. So I feel like the quicker I started to understand that, the easier it was for me to start to accomplish some of the long-term goals of what I was learning from, especially at the time, from Dr. Lane Ingham and Jeff Lowenfels.
Yeah, and Chip and I tried to touch on how important carbon is in the soil system, and those roots are carbon. Those are carbon, and now they're food for all the organisms. So once the plant dies, all of that root system, not only did it build you tilth, but it's providing a future carbon source for all of the biology in the system. So yeah, keep it cover cropped. Absolutely.
And doesn't that help with the plant growth promoting rhizobacteria, which is really when we're starting to get onto the next level of the soil food web, and that kind of stuff is when we're creating certain, the soil system itself is creating certain things that the cannabis plant needs?
Yeah. And again, like, be diverse, go polyculture. Don't just, use one kind of cover crop. I'm a big fan of potatoes, carrots, daikon, radishes, abundance of different things. And whatever dies off, don't replant it because it didn't like your system or didn't like the environment in which you put it in. But so go back to one of these other ones, creeping thyme, creeping lavender, all wonderful cover crop plants that and again, the diversity is the key. And yes, you're absolutely right, Brian. This will provide, that diversity will provide all kinds of goodies. And if you noticed last talk with Craig and Leaf, they showed highways of liquid going one way with biology in it. And so if you have a healthy soil system with saprophytic and mycorrhizae, those are creating highways for these organisms to move around. And therefore, if they're growing on the other side or 10 feet away from your plant and you have a good fungal dynamic system, those organisms can move from one plant to another.
And it really is the difference between like dial-up and a fiber optic network.
Right?
That's the best way I've always heard it described. Yeah.
Yeah, talk about it like a, what is it, Starlink, or what's Elon doing? Right? You're beaming all the way around the whole world, man.
Yeah, that's the goal, right? They want it.
It is.
All right, so Sean R., any chance we can gain any detailed information on BioComplete Compost that is taught by Elaine, or is this considered a copyrighted, patented process?
I don't believe it's a patented copyright process. I believe what she's trying to do is to separate compost into categories, which is what Chip did. He said basically not all compost is created equal, and he's right. And yeah, I think that's something that she's like struggled with, because people say, "Oh, I make compost." I mean, I've traveled the country and had guys that had, I've been making compost for 50 years. I make the best compost. Put it under the microscope, and there's nothing in there. There's no fungi. There's bacteria, but there's no protozoa. Yeah. So by calling it BioComplete, that means there's nematodes. There's all different types of protozoa, flagellates, amoebas. There's fungal, potentially mycorrhizae spores, because without a plant, there is no association for that fungi to grow out. And of course, saprophytic fungi, as well as yeasts, are critical. So by BioComplete, she means diverse, all of the whole soil food web, from the predator, the super predator, the T-Rex of the system, the nematode, all the way down to a multiple species of bacteria. Remember, each species does something. And just now we're finally getting to a point in science where we're not studying individual bacteria, we're studying communities of bacteria. Because again, those communities are in succession. Sometimes it takes this bacteria to get going to create this biofilm to feed the next bacteria, which is building on the next one, the next one, the next one. So in many ways, it's an entire community that is functioning, not one specific bacteria or one specific protozoa.
And that's how you also protect your crop as well, which is one of the more under-focused things I feel like when we have these talks and that kind of stuff, is being a cannabis farmer, cultivator that is able to not only grow the crop itself, but be able to protect said crop and be able to start to see some of the warning signs, every leaf curling, or some things that you start to see with the issues.
Yeah, with an incomplete system. I mean, right. The only time you're going to see a deficiency or a pest pressure is if you do not have a completely balanced, ecologically sound living soil. And so that this is where, again, it's all about diversity. So, back to the juicing. Think about if you pull that plant out of the ground, wash the roots, and press that plant. Like, don't grind it up in a grinder, but use a juicer to actually press all of that liquid out of that plant. That is just everything. It's endophytic. It's the rhizosphere. It's all of the plant's internal processes you're getting when you do that. And you can juice almost anything. Again, you don't want to juice a eucalyptus tree or something that has a neem tree or something that has biocide properties. But any type of, plants, bush, early succession, vegetables, anything will provide a nutritional value and feed certain species of bacteria and biology, and therefore providing that incredibly diverse system that prevents you from fighting nature. In the past, it's always been fighting nature, and the living soil system is working with nature, and therefore taking a tremendous amount of pressure and labor off of you. The labor's up front, you get it into play, and you don't let it dry out, don't overwater it, and you're off to the races.
Yeah, and then you're managing the system, which is so much better than mixing nutrients all day.
Yeah, fighting it.
Yeah, exactly. All right, Brandon, do you think there would be success in grafting cannabis plants onto seed root stock, kind of like apple propagation?
A good friend of mine years ago actually grafted a cannabis plant onto a hops plant and had wonderful, wonderful expression of terpenes that had never really been kind of seen in that particular cultivar of cannabis before. So yes, it can definitely be grafted.
Adam C., what is the most effective way to quickly reduce high sodium levels in soil?
Oh man, I'm gonna do a post on that. I got an OG formula. It's complicated, and I don't have the formula in front of me, but it's a 5-part, believe it or not, sugar mix that you mix into a 1-gallon container, and then every time you want to do a flush, you pour 1 cup out of that into 1 cup into a gallon of water, and use that to flush. Now, another thing is, I don't think a lot of people truly understand what flushing is.
Right.
The flushing is you wet the soil to a point where if you pour 1 cup of water into that soil, 1 cup of water comes out of that soil. So it's called completely soil saturation, where that soil can no longer accept any moisture. And once you hit that point, you're done. You don't continue to flush it. So basically, you hit its complete how do I say this? You get it to the point where it can no longer accept any more moisture, and then once you get to that point, test it, pour 1 cup on, make sure that 1 cup comes out completely, and now you're done. Now you let it sit for 3 days and dry out, and then repeat if necessary. And I often tell people you should do it at least twice, especially if you know you have a high salt content in there. I've been doing a lot of work with people trying to rehabilitate spent soils that had newts in them. And so it's always been, hey, just put it outside, put it in a pile, and let rain and nature do its course. And then once you're comfortable that you believe you've got the majority of salts out of it, then blend it with compost to reinvigorate it. But that takes time. So recently I started working with a gentleman, a cannabis farmer out here in SoCal, and he dropped that trick, and I was like, wow, that's huge, because now you can flush it twice and be off to the races again. So when I have time, I'll put that formula down and do a live IG for you guys or I'll put it up on a post so that it's there forever.
Yeah, absolutely. IG Live really is just, you can post for longer than 60 seconds. I know it's confusing for a lot of people, but, or IGTV, I'm sorry. So there's a lot we could play around with that, Leighton.
I was just going to do like a quick video. Go ahead.
Yeah. Clay wanted to know how much the compost test was that Mr. Osborn was talking about earlier.
Chip uses a new company out of Maine that is doing some really amazing work. I just can't stress it enough. It is an expensive test. I think it's like $500, so it's not a joke. Mm-hmm. But it has everything in it, including theoretical plant available carbon sources. In other words, a plant leaks out exudates, right? And if those exudates aren't completely used up, that is a volatile carbon source that is available for any other biology to consume. And this test actually gets onto that theoretical side of what is excess exudates in volatile carbon. And so it's the first of its kind in I pretty much think the world, but it definitely is the first of its kind here in America. And yeah, I would go back. I mean, if you're serious and you have a budget, I would absolutely go that route, because it is so much more advanced in understanding some of these intricacies that we quite haven't gotten there yet with our knowledge. And that's why this gentleman created that test.
Right on. Professor B, I'm hoping that's Professor Bluntstash. Pertaining to the A horizon, if silt and sand is not available, would a layer of under 20% compost and 80% sand suffice to prevent anaerobic condition in a long-term 3 to 5 year situation?
Absolutely. Again, that's why 50% sand is used in the A horizon, is to help mitigate moisture movement. And that's why the E horizon is also rock and sand. It's not just rocks, because you don't want organic matter to get down into that E horizon, because it will rot and it will go anaerobic.
Right.
So in the absence of clay and silt, I would say sure. But I can also tell you this, if you don't have clay and you don't have silt readily available or any way to wildcraft it, all you have to do is go out and dig up healthy soil, and there's your A horizon. Just add sand to it and add organic matter. Add some of your O horizon into it. And the way to tell what percentage sand, silt, and clay that is goes back to that mason jar. So take a mason jar, fill it 5/8 full with soil, add 2 more parts of water, so you remain with 1/8 of that overall volume of that jar is air. Screw the lid on it, shake it up, sit it down, come back 2 days later. You'll see a perfect layer of the sand on the bottom because that'll settle out immediately. Then you'll see a layer of silt, which would be your second layer, and it usually is dark. And then on top of it, you'll see your clay layer. And then anything floating is organic matter. Anything that's kind of floating on the top of the clay is organic matter. It's just been hydrophilic. Mm-hmm. So that's a great way to test what your percentages are, and then you can slightly amend as necessary.
Yes, sir. Julie is a big fan of yours. She's been watching your episodes on Shaping Fire, and she wants to know, where is a good resource to get free rocks, gems? You mentioned going to a quarry in Shaping Fire episode 54. How do I do that?
That goes back to, contacting your local parks and recreational wing of the government, whether it's county or state or even town, and ask them, hey, was there any mining done around here? I mean, I used to love to go up to the tourmaline mine in Maine, where they had watermelon tourmalines. And, in the tailings that come from mining is a lot of really cool rocks and semi-precious gems. And in some cases, you can actually still find gems. You just got to hunt around because they've been picked over by a lot of people. So in that regard, a gem, like a crystal in nature, has incredible value. There's all kinds of things that took to form that crystal, and whether you grind it up and put it in your soil mix, or whether you just bury that crystal whole in there, it is providing another level of nutritional value, and some might actually say paramagnetic or a spiritual influence. I mean, I know there's a lot of people out there that put crystals, alongside their cannabis plants. And I'm not one to poo-poo this stuff. I believe in biodynamics, which a lot of people think is, woo-woo, but it isn't. I mean, the influences of nature on a larger scale are real. The tides rise, the tides go back on high and new moons. You get the highest and lowest tides of the month during those 2 periods. And so everything in nature has got water in it. So it's pretty realistic to think that, the moons affect us. And I truly believe that's why we call it lunatics. And so to say that the moon affects us, well, then why not all the other planets swinging around? Now you're getting into astrology. And when I was a kid, I laughed at, Mercury in retrograde. Yeah. No, there's some truth to it, man. It does affect how you think and how you react. So again, biomimicking nature, taking all these things into consideration. Yeah, I would highly recommend that you do get some crystalline formula or components. And again, whether you grind them up and make them a lot more biologically available, or whether you just throw them in whole pieces. Go for it.
I can attest to that too. My own mother's a yogi and into some things where we've definitely gone back and forth on some of the things that she believes in. And so one of the things I used to tease her about is, kind of spending the little money that she does have in life on rocks and jewels and stuff. And right before she left, unbeknownst to me, she left some quartz in one of the pots where I was just learning. Really, that's where my knowledge of living soil started to take off. And I will say that plant was so much healthier than the other ones around it, even though those plants were healthy. And so I was talking to my mom, and then she mentioned that plant, told me to dig into it, and that's when I found that quartz. So I will have to say that she made me partially a believer in a lot more of the metaphysical things of plants just by putting the quartz rock into the soil medium itself.
Oh, it's great to hear, Brian. That's great. That's a great testimony. And I think there are other people out there that have done this and seen the results as well.
Especially for a growing up in Georgia and stuff, we don't really use the word metaphysical.
Listen to this. All right, you want to take it to the next level?
Sure.
A friend of mine actually gets raw rubies and raw emeralds or beryl and grinds them up and puts it in water and makes teas for people to drink, to ingest. And he's had amazing results in healing ailments that nobody else could figure out what was wrong. So you go to the doctor and they're like, I don't know. You go to him, a witch doctor, for lack of better words, and he would look at you, figure out what your problem was, because he was very, what is the correct word? Empathic. So he can see your aura and feel your emotions and where you're out of balance. And then he would grind up an opal or grind up an emerald or a ruby. But again, these are not gem quality. They're just you can't make a good stone out of them. They have inclusions or whatever, and you can buy these at your gem shops and then just grind them up and then mix them with water and drink them.
I never heard
use your own
man.
Intuition. Yeah, use your own intuition. Like go into the gem store and see what gems resonate with you. And if you go, oh man, I'm feeling something with this one. There's something special here. But again, you got to get out of your head and into your spirituality to be able to read this. But I know every human has the ability to do it. It's just we've lost focus. We're jammed up with so much other shit that we don't really listen to our intuition. And I can personally speak. Every time I don't listen to my intuition, something bad happens for sure.
Amen. Clay wants to know, can biology not change the pH locally?
Biology absolutely changes the pH. I've been laughed off stages a number of times by people saying that that's impossible. But if you research it, you will see that the plant, a super healthy plant, I believe, can shift pH in its root zone up to 2 full points to mine certain things. And the way they do that is they push exudates from one specific type of bacteria. The bacteria's influence will change the pH based on its concentration. So that is fact.
And to echo that, like an experience for me is, check out these living soil farms. Check out some of these guys that really have things dialed in, and check out when they're showcasing on Instagram or other media when they're laid into flower. And look at, there's not really that much of a fade going on. The deficiencies, it looks like everything's just working in a symbiotic relationship up until harvest. And that's where I really do feel like that quality, and hopefully in time, that's where you're going to get more of that yield back as that soil system begins to come alive and thrive.
I'm into that.
All right, Mr. DK, I imagine that in order to leverage that system, you have to have serious identification skills besides common microscopy. Yeah. Boy. Are there many species in soil that is hard to identify to the point where you can tell its weight just by looking at it?
All right. So the easy answer is the nose. Right. So if you smell it and you don't smell anything, then there's probably not a life in there. If you smell it and it smells like rich forest floor, you've got a good diverse population of microbes. We've identified, I've been told 10%, I've been told 1% of bacteria species on the planet. And the same with fungi, and the same with yeasts, and same with protozoa. So I got to believe that the more we explore and understand our environment, our ecosystem, that we'll discover more species that we didn't even know existed. I mean, they just recently started drilling mile plus down into the core of the earth and coming back with biology that's never been seen before. So our planet is, the rocks are alive. And I'll tell this story. I've told it before. When I was at Rodale, I did an experiment. I went back to my stone shop and I threw a slab of the hardest stone I'd ever come across, which was a red agate / granite coming out of Africa. It was polished on both sides. So bottom line is, when you polish it, you don't get biological life. Like I said, don't use river rocks unless you smash them. And I put it on a bridge saw, and I ran a saw blade through it with a tremendous amount of chlorinated water because I used town water. I collected that slurry. I put it in a vial that I had filled with DI water, which kills all biology. And I brought it back to Rodale, put it under the microscope, and there was bacteria in it. All right. So I did this in a way that I could not cross-contaminate it to the best of my ability. And I think I performed that task pretty damn well. And yet that rock was alive. With the pressure of that blade spinning at 10,000 RPM, I mean, you can see the red glow of shooting sparks coming off of it as it's cutting the stone. Just that should have killed everything. It didn't. So, the rock is alive. And so do we really know what bacteria species living inside a rock? No. And different color rocks are going to have different types of bacteria. So I got to believe that we are just on the beginning stages of trying to understand individual species, but more importantly, now we're more focused on communities of species.
This question is from Linda, and I think you use a different microscope, but she wants to know from Dr. Elaine Ingham, from her website, where can I find the microscope she mentioned in the last webinar that it includes a one-day class on how to use it?
Ooh, I don't know that one. But I mean, there is plenty of stuff online that you can watch on basic microscopy. Personally, I think she recommends the Omax. I'm not a big fan of that just because the slide bar, it's uncomfortable. It doesn't fit nicely. The one I use is a Swift, and I got the German adjustable headset. So it kind of telescopes down in a swing and on an arc to fit your eyes. I find that's a much more comfortable scope to use. But, that's just my recommendation. And then as far as trying to get a 1 hour free microscopy class, that I'm not sure of.
I would recommend you going to her Instagram. I see that they're doing some heavy promotion on Facebook and Instagram. So just DM them, and I'm sure they would be able to answer that question. This is from Dustin B. Have there been any studies conducted that show that certain species of plants prefer different fungal to bacterial ratios?
Yes, just look at succession. If you Google that or search it, I shouldn't recommend Google anymore, but just search plant succession, and you will see there's incredible information on that, and studies that have been done for many, many years, to say the least. The redwood forest is about 10,000, maybe 100,000 to 1 fungal to bacteria. You get into a swamp or a riparian system, and you're going to have like a 0.05 fungus to bacteria ratio, and so there it is. There's a lot of data out there.
Yeah, and like I said, I'm experimenting with myself, but it does seem like the more fungal aspects that you're able to inoculate and build, the easier everything seems to become. Yeah,
and just a heads up that mycorrhizae is 50% of your fungal kingdom. If you're not using it, you're missing out on 50% of its potential. Now, the problem with mycorrhizae is you can't disturb it. If you disturb it, you break that network. It's like taking that broadband and cutting it. It can no longer work anymore. So you have to be very careful about not disturbing it. And again, I highly recommend, if you're going to get into a mycorrhizae product, that you send it off to MycoRoots. Efren will give you a detailed report on whether you have a viable source of inoculant or not. The test is relatively inexpensive. The shipping is going to cost you more. When I purchase mycorrhizae products, I have them direct shipped to him first. And I tell them, if this is not viable, I'm going to expect my money back. And so right away, it kind of puts them on edge, like, this is no joke. And so they're going to make sure that they're sending you something that's viable and not something that's been sitting on a shelf for a couple of years. There's very little quality control in the mycorrhizae manufacturing world, which is a shame. So you can get one bag that's loaded with spores and another that has no spores. And you will never know unless you have it tested to see what it actually is. Another good reason to test is because sometimes you'll end up with more spores than it says in the bottle, which means you can dilute it more and you get more coverage out of it. And then the biggest factor that nobody is doing is sending in root and soil samples to Aeration to have analysis to determine what your colonization rate is and whether it's even functioning, whether you have any colonization or any spore production. Because if you have colonization, technically you should have spore production, and therefore you will never have to inoculate it again. It will just continuously cycle more and more and more. So key takeaway on this is again, using a horizontal soil system that doesn't collapse, provides those rocks and those minerals that mycorrhizae wants. If you put mycorrhizae into a peat moss or a super soil, what's it going to mine? There's nothing there for it to mine. So you're wasting your money in that application, and you're foolish to not include it in a horizontal soil system.
Yeah, I think, something else that I remember, at least, at the beginning stages of when all these products started coming to the cannabis market, the real secret is that the majority of them were coming from one or two places, and then these brands were white labeling it. And the effectiveness would just be like, company A used so many propagules, where company B would just use more of it, so that product was better. Do you remember any of that, or is there some truth to that?
Oh, definitely, there's some truth to that. There was a company, and I probably shouldn't name them, that was probably the premier supplier of mycorrhizae, and they were out of the northern Midwest. So that should tell you. Just search there, and you'll find out who it is. It's a very well-known brand. I purchased the product and used it, and I did not see results. So I sent a bag to Aeration and had him examine it. And he got back to me. He said, yeah, it's got spores, but none of them are viable. They're all shriveled up. And so that kind of opened my eye to like, wow, I've been paying $50 a bag for junk, and all I got was clay out of it. So again, it's a blind product unless you are good with a microscope and can determine the spore and propagule counts, because we should talk about propagules. Propagules are the only way you're going to get propagules if you're growing in vivo, which means using nature to grow them out. If you're growing them in a lab, you will only get spores. You maybe get some hyphae. But it has kind of been understood in the industry that we don't know if the hyphaes are even viable propagules. So propagules are root fragments which have the endophytic connection into the plant. That's viable. That's probably even more viable than the spores themselves. Then you have spores, and then you have hyphae. So if you're buying an in vivo product, this is another kind of misnomer in the industry. We do not know the efficacy of that product unless you test the root colonization. So if it's grown in a lab and it's spoiled because it's been given a perfect environment, perfect foods, no competition, then how viable is it when you throw it into a hostile environment that's thriving with biology? We don't know. There's never been any follow-up on this. And more importantly, has anybody sent root fragments to Aeration to see colonization? Those are so important. It's not funny. And if you're hardcore and you really want to do this right, you're going to have to spend a little money on testing. And if you see trichoderma listed on that product, trichoderma is a contaminant. It's a competitor to mycorrhizae. It will colonize faster than mycorrhizae can, and therefore shut mycorrhizae out of colonization spots or air connections. So keep all those things in mind. There should be no trichoderma in your mycorrhizae product.
And for you living soil nerds that want to dive deeper into that, the Oregon Department of Ag a few years ago did an excellent study on a lot of these soil microbes. And, do your own research, but you can see that a lot of those products are literally colored water. Some of those bottles are $70 to $100 that came out as colored water. So you can easily see for at least from that test alone, that some of these products, some of these companies obviously had more than they were claiming, but the majority of them out there were really like snake oil. So buyer beware on that. Again, that's why we're going out of our way to educate you guys, because we want you guys to be able to have, for the most part, be able to understand every input that you're putting in, and for the most part, to be able to build that yourself, or be able to obtain those amendments closer to where you're at. Kind of butchered what I was trying to get. Well put. Yeah, all right.
Well put.
And I appreciate us going long on this, Leighton. Unfortunately, we had that tech issue last time, but I know that these Q&A things are really where I feel like a lot of people get the most out of. They're able to ask specific questions that is pertaining to their growth. So to me, this is next level. And like I've always joked, when we first started out, if I were to ask you a question back in the day, Leighton, and we were on IC Mag or Overgrow together, it might take you 3 days to get back to me. Where, here is a platform where you're rapid firing, answering complex questions, and really helping us minimize the time it takes to understand living soil and natural farming and the horizons on a whole nother level.
No, I agree with you. A lot of times the questions tease out other areas that were not covered thoroughly, or they reinforce some points that were previously made. So I agree with you. Having a Q&A is a wonderful way to get a lot of questions answered over a broad horizon or broad area topics.
Usually you have to go to like one of the live expos and hopefully get, your hand called on kind of thing. And there's maybe 10 minutes for Q&A and there's 300 people in the room. So this is kind of a cooler, yeah. Which is why I always just throw up my hand first, is trying to get those questions in. I've always enjoyed learning like this. John M. has a question for you. What would you recommend for someone who was growing in a 15-gallon fabric pot? Would you use the horizon method or just engineered living soil?
I don't know what engineered living soil is. I know what engineered soil is. Engineered soil is where you go to a company and you ask for a certain percentage, like all golf courses and sports turf fields are engineered soil systems. The biggest problem they have in the engineered soil system in the world is they hate organic matter, because organic matter is unstable in the soil system. In other words, if you have too much of it, the soil becomes muddy or mucky. When you run across it with cleats, they're going to sink and you're going to have, high spots and low spots. So they want 98 to 99% sand and then a fraction of clay or silt or some other form of organic matter. And the problem with that is this is what I ran into in my early work, was that when they're feeding nitrogen, depending on whether they're using ammonia or nitrate, different things get consumed. So in the example of nitrate, I'm pretty sure it's the carbon is required. The bacteria require a certain level of carbon in their system in order to be able to convert that nitrogen into a plant available source. And with ammonia, I believe it's water. You need a tremendous amount of water in the cell to break that ammonia down and make it plant available. So what happens over time is if you use nitrate fertilizer on a high-performance sports turf field, you will chew that organic matter down to almost nothing. Now you cannot support biological life. So that's where I started putting down these liquid extracts that were highly concentrated humic acid, loaded with biology, and you apply that to soil. Usually within 2 to 3 weeks, I could build an A horizon on the top of it that was still stable. It still was 99% sand, but we had the other liquid form of carbon that provided that food source for advanced biology or complete living soil to occur. So fungi, protozoa, everything could survive in that system.
All right, just a few more questions here. This one's from Jacob. Since Efren couldn't give us names and Leighton said he could, what's some good companies we should use? I think he's meaning from the mycorrhizal fungi aspect.
Yeah, for the mycorrhizal fungi. I would just say DM me and I'll turn you on to the company. That's probably the easiest way to do it.
Yeah, well said.
Let me see. I might have his contact information in here. You keep firing away while I'm looking.
Okay. This is a good question from Clay. This is where I'm a little conflicted. Leighton's talking about broken down organic matter to the point just before humate, but silt is defined as rock at a particle size larger than clay.
I know. This is the dogma that I've been fighting for a long time. The properties of sand, silt, and clay are all different. All right, clay can hold a magnetic charge. It can swell, and it can shrink when it's dried out. It can swell with water and shrink when it dries out. Silt holds a negative charge. Clay holds a positive and negative charge. Sand holds no charge. All right. So right away, the properties are different. So why are they classified by sieve size? All right. The other thing is specific gravity. The sand settles first. The clay takes 8 to 12 hours, or excuse me, the silt takes 8 to 12 hours to settle, and the clay can take up to 2 days to settle. So they all have a completely different specific gravity property. But yet again, they're classified based on particulate size. And to be honest with you, silt is organic matter. It's not fucking rock. Now, this is where it gets complicated, all right? So prime example of how remineralization can occur. I had a 1,000-gallon aquatic system or aquaculture system. All I did was add water and feed the fish. Every time I cleaned out my clarifier to harvest my fish waste that was loaded with biology, I would get a certain amount of sand and I'd get a certain amount of clay. Not a lot, but a little. And so there's a thing called remineralization that occurs. It's natural. It's done through biology. Biology steals an electron here, a proton there. Magnetism creates bonding on an atomic and subatomic level that remineralizes out of nothing minerals. So again, all I added was food, and there was no sand in the food. There was no clay in the food, and water, and there were minerals in the water. But yet there they come. They precipitate out of the water column. So again, this is a highly complex question, but based on common sense, I buck the traditional soil system or soil science dogma of that these things should be classified only by the sieve size and not by their other properties.
I will say, Clay, I saw you asking. Company? Yeah, go ahead, bud.
The name of that company is called Symbio Soils. So that's SYMBIO Soils, SOILS. Not to be confused with Sim Soil, not SYM Soil. It's Symbio Soil. And then you can find him at gmail.com.
Right on. And to follow up, Clay, if you're still on there, bud, I have personally noticed that calcium is king. I do try to get calcium in there and really get things churning, and I do see more success personally with higher calcium rates. Hillary Ann has a question for you. How do you determine the level of microbial activity?
All right, so real easy field tests would be how easy can you stick your finger down into the soil? All right, if you have high levels of aggregate or aggregation, you should be able to just stick your finger down into the soil, and it should smell really good. And again, another quick, easy test is infiltration test. You can search that online. It's something you can do yourself, no problem. And if you have great infiltration, that would indicate a high biological level. And again, you can also pull roots up, and if you have clods all the way around the roots, and just outside the root zone, like if you can pull up chunks of soil and everything is just hanging on together, That's another good indication of aggregation. There's no way you're going to have aggregation without biology. So again, bacteria excrete glues. They're called biofilms. If you Google biofilm, everything you'll see is going to be negative, which is insane because that's the foundation of all life. So bacteria create biofilm that bonds sand, silt, and clay together into micro and macro aggregates. Fungi create fungal mycelium, which also holds things together, and they leak. Both saprophytes and mycorrhizae both leak substances called glomulin, which is another organic glue that bonds particulars together. So that's a quick, short, dirty answer to finding out if you have a good microbial community in your soil system. Then, of course, the next level is to send it off to an earth fort to determine what you have as far as F to B ratio, how many predators you have, whether you have nematodes or not. That's the more long-term answer.
And Hillary wanted to clarify here. So you're saying that it was in regard to compost when Chip was talking about a compost pile, that when it's mature, the activity went down.
Yes. All right. Again, if you have a high level of biology or bacteria specifically, that pile is going to heat up. Right. And that means it's still churning nitrogen. So you don't want high nitrogen in your compost pile. You want that carbon and nitrogen ratio to drop down into a level where when you spread that compost, it's not going to actually start sucking nitrogen out of the soil. You hear me talk a lot about chips, right? I love wood chips. They do such wonderful things as far as, their aeration. They're a carbon source. They create pockets for fungus to mine, a lot of material. Now, the problem is if you use brand new chips that you just chipped up, they are going to steal nitrogen out of your soil system so that they can start breaking down. It's again, feeding the bacteria to do the work that it needs to do to break that source down. Everything in nature is always in flux, always in motion. And without plants, you're not putting down carbon, you're not putting down roots, you're not building soil structure. And so all of these things are critical. But when you're starting up a system, if you use old chips, chances are when you dig those chips, you'll find a mycelium network of saprophytic fungi doing their job. So you just got an inoculant for free. And when you place them into your soil system, you're not going to have to worry about that soil system or that chip stealing the nitrogen out of your soil system. So old chips only, never new. And if you have new compost and you put it down on your soil, that new compost is going to strip that nitrogen out. So that's why it's so important that you have mature compost. And I guarantee you a lot of these big compost companies, they'll spend all summer making compost for next spring. And they'll keep making compost in throughout the winter months as long as they possibly can. But when they run out of that stuff in spring that had sat there for 6 to 9 months, they're going to give you new shit. And that's always been a problem. I mean, Chip and I have talked about, even companies he worked for sent him new shit and fucked his plants up. So if you're gonna buy commercial compost, be smart about it. And like he said, use your nose. If you smell ammonia, you know that the decomposition process is still going on and it's immature and you don't want to use it. Another gentleman I mentioned earlier, 60 acres he lost of new plants because he put down an immature compost. So it's a real danger. So think ahead, buy the compost, put it on your property and let it sit there for 6 to 8 months. And then you're guaranteed you have finished compost. And if it smells like ammonia, either if you're forced to use it, cover crop it with a nitrogen pig, like corn or something else, just to suck out all that ammonia that you can. And that will also knock down those decomposing bacteria to a level where they're tolerable.
A good question from Dustin B. I recently reached out to a well-known company that makes microbial products. I asked them why they have trichoderma in their mycorrhizae product, and they said that in their research, they had a good relationship. They also pointed out that if trichoderma outcompeted mycorrhizae, then it would have taken over Earth by now. What are your thoughts on this?
that was a great duck. The mycorrhizae products I work with do not have trichoderma in them, not in a measurable way. Trichs are important; they're part of the system. But think about it this way: trichodermic are airborne; they're everywhere, and so to say they're going to take over, no, they're already present and blowing around all around us all the time. So nature keeps things in balance, and if this gets back to some really deep dives that I've done in the past 6 months with a couple of real brainiacs, the understanding of bacterial communities being kept in check, right? Because any one organism, if it's super competitive and has the right food source, it gets out of whack. You're not going to stop that. But eventually, sooner or later, that system is going to collapse. And the reason why is because there's viruses in everything, in every cell. The levels of virus in water, the levels of virus in soil, the levels of viruses in the air. And the viruses are what keeps things in check. They're called the great corrector, because if one population gets out of control, the viruses will get out of control, and then they'll knock that population back to keep it in balance. Nature is the perfect system. I mean, you can read up as like, it's a wonder why we even exist in our atmosphere. We have an atmosphere and exist floating in space in the middle of nowhere. So, that's a really deep dive, but the short answer is no. Trichs are everywhere. They should not be in your microbial products, your mycorrhizae products. That's a failure in manufacturing. And fact check my ass, man. Check me out. Yeah. Check it out. You Google it. You go to Google Scholar to get straight answers. Go to ResearchGate. That's real information. Tremendous amount of white papers on this stuff.
Yeah, and I feel like you can also, trust your intuition when you talk to a lot of those guys. And if you bring that up to them, which we have at expos and stuff, it's a really hard question for them to answer. So that was interesting the way that he phrased that. How are you feeling, buddy? Do you want to kind of stop here? There's 3 questions left. We could finish up. They're starting to come in,
let's
actually.
Finish them up.
All right. So from Jacob, what is the smallest size aquaponic system you could get away with on a 4x4 grassroots bed?
Smallest system. I would say if he goes back to, hopefully he watched the previous one I did on AMOs, you can get a 10-gallon fish tank, and you can collect that fish waste a couple of different ways. There was a really cool bubbler filter that I loved that used air to pull the suspended solids out of the water column. Or you can just use the backpack filter with a little sponge in it, and then you just squeeze the sponge out and rinse it out thoroughly into a bucket of water. And then you can bubble that water and add a tiny bit of food, like just a finger dot of molasses in there, and you'll grow out the protozoa, the ones you're looking for. So, I've seen the smallest aquaponic system I've seen is really cool. It's just a plant, a water plant with a betta fish in it. And the betta fish, you don't feed it. The plant feeds it. And in turn, it poops and feeds the plant. It's a really cool little micro aquaponic system.
Well, on the table, kind of on the shelf aquaponic system.
Right.
Adam B, should you use FAA or fish hydrolysate to inoculate your fresh wood chips? I don't think anything beats FAA.
Yeah, no, it can't hurt. There's a new product rolling out. I don't know if you have it on the slides there, that the company back east that has the AMOs that they're rolling out. Again, they're in the process of getting registered in all 49 states. They're not going to bother with Hawaii. And there you go. I mean, a combination of those two things, the fish waste, the proteins. But remember, hydrolysates are not all the same. A lot of times they're stealing off the actual oil or fish meal out of it to make fish food, and they're sending you the leftovers. So this gets into hydrolysate versus, oh boy, brain cramp.
Fish emulsions.
Yeah, emulsion, emission, and hydrolysate, right?
Right.
And especially if they're using heat to cook those off, you're losing a lot of the things that you want to get. So you really got to know your source. And Keith is going to be rolling out a hydrolysate that I know he's not stripping anything out of too. So that would be my source to get something that I knew worked. And I'm a freak about knowing my source, and I highly recommend everybody out there that listening does the same thing. Be proactive. Find out who they are, what they do, how they manufacture it, what are their standard operating procedures before you purchase the product.
And this is a fabulous way to kind of end this. Sean R. has a question about a company that I feel like a lot of the OGs used to use. The company is called Kelp for Less. Again, this is just my opinion, Sean. Kelp for Less is a company that people used to use, but the quality, especially the continuous quality of their products, has definitely gone downhill. And in my opinion, I would stay away from them on all products, including mycorrhizal fungi. So again, we wanted to thank AgroCoco guys. They are one of the main reasons why we're able to bring some of the best and brightest minds to you, in the comfort of your own living home. When we design these things, when Leighton goes out of his way to get these speakers, we are thinking about you guys first. So we appreciate that you guys are taking the time to not only break this down, but utilizing the replays and going over things and asking questions. That really is the goal of all of us here that is part of the SCCA crew, is for us to continue that education, continue on what's going on. So we wanted to also give a session shout out to Sweet Heel CBD. Thank you guys again for sponsoring our special guest, Chip Osborn, as well as Leighton Morrison today. Again, a fantastic talk, and we're going to have a lot more in store for you guys later this month as well. Leighton, did you have anything else to say, bud?
No, just thank you to the you guys, the attendees. Yeah, we've done our best to get you the brightest minds, and also build on each session so that we're not like bouncing around. We set this up so that you could start at the beginning, and if you already were proficient in it, you didn't need to do the first one. But if you needed a reminder, that's why we did the first session the way we did it, and the second session and this next session is really going to get crazy, really deep on new tech that's coming out, and making it so much easier for you guys to grow your plants. So, and thanks again to Sweet Heel and AgroCoco.
Yeah, and to all our sponsors, Blue Mat, Pit Moss, all the guys that have been helping us out, even in the first one, Miller's Soils. We appreciate all of you guys. And again, our goal is to educate you. So the cheaper that we can keep everything down, it's going to be beneficial for the entire community. And again, we want you guys to know that we're going out of our way for you. That's why we make sure that we pay all of our speakers, something that is not really seen here in the cannabis space. We want to make sure that everybody feels like their time is rewarded. And that's something that I feel like Daniel, Leighton, and myself are really proud of. So thank you guys again. We look forward to... Oh, sorry about that.
Yeah, let me just say one last thing. Efren is going to be re-recording his last 11 slides. So keep your eyes open for that replay. You probably want to listen to it again.
Yeah, we're doing a whole major overhaul behind the scenes, Leighton, Daniel, and myself on the replays, guys. So just bear with us with that. We found our platform, obviously. We like having the Q&A and the whole way that things are done compared to, when we had issues a few weeks ago. So again, guys, improving steps forward in 2021, and we're going to continue to educate not only the country, but now that we have a virtual platform, the world. So Living Soil and Ords, we appreciate it, and we look forward to talking to you guys later this month. All right, we are done, guys. I'm going to shut this off. Shout out to Daniel and Leighton. Appreciate you guys. Shout out to everybody that's still on the chat. We can't thank you guys enough for, not only being a part of this, but going out of your way to be engaged. And I really think that's what makes the difference here, is that you guys are going to see that we value your time. We're going out of our way for you so that you guys know that we're not going to sit here and give you a bunch of fluff. We're going to give you as direct information and as quickly as we can. So 3 hours is a long time, but at the same time, to learn the in-depth knowledge that we're giving you, 3 hours is really nothing compared to what, the amount of time that a lot of the older crews used to have to spend to understand even at 10% of what Leighton and Chip explained to you guys today. So shout out to all of you. Look forward to talking to you in the future.